Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the City Council meeting in South Burlington for December 2nd, 2024. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Who would like to lead tonight? Stephen? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now, instructions on exiting the building in case of emergency and review of technology options. Jesse Baker, City Manager.
Thank you. So for those in the room, if there's an emergency in the room, you can go out the rear of the auditorium on the left or right side and then turn left or right to get outside. For those participating remotely, thank you for joining us. If you have a comment or if you'd like to speak on an item that's on the agenda, you can turn your camera on and the chair will call on you. Or you can indicate that you would like to speak in the chat and I will have the chair call on you. Other than that, we are not monitoring the chat for content.
Now we're going to do the agenda review. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the order of agenda items tonight?
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
About item 13, the executive session potentially on the Longview project. That may not be needed depending on how the council wants to proceed. So I would say optional for now, and I will take direction from the council on that.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 4, which is comments and questions from the public not related to our agenda tonight. Is there anybody in the audience or online who would like to comment on something not on our agenda tonight? Wendell, come on up, identify yourself, make sure the light is bright green. You push that button first, okay? Is it green?
It was green, but not bright enough.
And identify yourself, please.
Okay, I'm going to be really quick. I just hope you're thinking along with the budget that about South Burlington's ability to raise revenue. I get this strange feeling it's going down. Part of that could be where I live in the city, because what was a vibrant place when I moved here 8 years ago is now literally a slum. And there are some much bigger factors that make me think so. So I'm just hoping you are looking at both sides of this equation. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's Wendell Coleman, right?
Correct.
Okay, now we have you on the record. Thank you. Moving to item 5. Good.
Tim.
Oh,
Ryan
you
Doyle.
Jumped up and you didn't give me a warning.
So I want to go back to past conversations about ethics on this board and the agreement that you all signed at the start of your terms. A couple meetings back, Andrew stated that he was able to fairly handle a conflict, which I think he very much showed that he did not handle that conflict. And he also didn't mention that his wife used to be on the board of the South Burlington Land Trust. And if you notice from 1C and 1D, it does talk about those kinds of relationships and those types of concerns.
Mr. Doyle, there is an item on the agenda later about this Longview property. Is that what you're referring to?
That's about a property, not about the ethics. Last year we had a lot of issues around Andrew and Megan using the chair liaison as a way to advocate to committees rather than using that as a way to just bridge between the council and their committees. We've had a lot of appointments without people specifying the types of political and financial relationships that they have. Specifically, Andrew, after he was elected, he appointed Lori, and you all appointed Lori and Francis to the Planning Commission, but no one disclosed that Francis made multiple contributions to Andrew or that Lori was his treasurer. And that stuff should be divulged, and that those conflicts should be spoken about. And certainly most of the people who were here advocating for certain projects in front of Andrew the last time also were large contributors to him. And so in your ethics agreement, you do agree to talk about those things in advance and determine if you can manage those. And if you can't, there are also consequences that can be moved forward. And I would really like you all to think very strongly about that and discourage Andrew from participating in conversations and to recuse himself formally and sit with the members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Moving on to item 5, which is Councilors' Announcements and Reports on Committee Assignments and City Manager's Report. Elizabeth, would you like to go first?
Sure. I had an opportunity to attend the SB3C budgeting meeting, and I think council will see something at our next meeting on a proposal there. The group really tried to put together some thoughts that would focus on creating a part-time position that would really work on the business development district within City Center and focus on a number of, or the potential for events, but also look at a program that would become self-sustaining over a period of time based on a number of potential sources of revenues there. So I'll look forward to hearing their presentation, but it was a good discussion, and I just had an opportunity to sit in and listen to it. I also attended the Planning Commission meeting, and there was a strong interest in working with the reconfigured housing committee that I think we're going to talk about on our agenda tonight, really around an educational component or a how-to manual for the recent LDR changes and sort of how that translates, how those changes translates into informing and educating community members on what the opportunities are with the revised LDRs for any kind of numbers of potential housing options. So those were 2 great meetings.
Thank you. Andrew?
Sure. So I attended Safe Routes to School meeting. We reviewed the results from the Champlain School survey as well as the survey for the pilot Greenway. Got a lot of great responses, 70 responses on the Chamberlain School survey, about equivalent number on the Greenway. With respect to Chamberlain, lots of recommendations about how to improve the safety of routes to school. Tom was at the meeting, so we have to figure out how to integrate some of those things into the overall plan of improvements for bike ped infrastructure. Same thing with the pilot. How do you integrate the improvements there and make them permanent. Interestingly, we had bump outs in that pilot, which is, narrowing of the street as you kind of approach the end of the road. And the reviews on that were kind of mixed. It slows traffic, but also forces traffic and bikes into the same lane. And so the question was, how do you kind of achieve that same effective slowing traffic, but not maybe create a hazard while you're doing that. So that's something that we need to think about. We also discussed the crossing guard situation that the school is kind of continuing to have difficulty filling those positions, and the question came up whether, if the city were to advertise, whether we could help the city advertise, whether we have channels that the schools don't have. So I'll throw that out there. I don't know, Jesse, if you had that conversation, but there was a request for us to help if we have additional channels to help with that. Then I attended a meeting for the Vermont Climate Action Plan that was focused on municipalities, focused on councilors and other municipal staff, and asked what do we need? What do we need to be able to do our climate change work better? And people said mostly data. Folks that are not in VGS territory have a lot of trouble collecting data on heating oil, propane. People also said that trouble collecting data on greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, but it was pointed out that UVM now is publishing that data, collecting data from Department of Motor Vehicles and publishing that data on like a year lag. You can access it. So it's actually much better data than we've ever had in order to assess how we're doing in terms of transportation. So that's pretty cool. I said, give us more authority because, we need authority to regulate thermal heating EVs if we really want to move forward. So if the state would grant us that would really, really help. We'll see how that goes. And then finally, there's this group, Run on Climate, that Lori and I are part of. They help folks get elected to office municipally that are want to take action on climate change, and I put together a deck and presented on what we've been doing, and people were very interested in that. And when you kind of see it all together, is pretty powerful. We should really be very proud of ourselves, how much we've done, and folks were kind of interested in that and really liked it. And this is a group that like knows we need to really do this, even though each of the folks in that group represent, small actors like us. I think everyone there understands, like we do, that if no one acts unless everyone else acts, nothing will ever get done, and we have no hope. So each of us kind of needs to do as much as we can, really, for our children to have a future. So that was it.
Thank you, Andrew. Mike?
As the backup, I attended the Chittenden County Regional Program Group, and it really was impressive to listen to the first time a discussion that goes beyond South Burlington on how much we're trying to do the same things in Chittenden County, but yet we're so stovepipe because we have our certain limited authority in this sense, and how important this coordination body is, and how many resources it brings to bear. The issue did come up about shared funding of equity employee among all the members, and there seemed to be strong support for that. So I hope that's something we can support here as well, as each municipality will contribute to that funding, and the person will be based with them. So that was, and they also underscored the importance of, as a group, to speak about our collective interests at the state level. So it was for me a very educational meeting to listen to and follow. Then I also attended or zoomed in and listened in on the meeting for GMT Clayton, the general manager, with city managers, talking about the continuous progress on the evolution of Green Mountain Transit. The general takeaway, and maybe this will come up in our budget, was that pretty much all of the municipalities, and I'm just talking about the urban municipalities, are supportive of will most likely, or the general manager's sense was most likely support the regular assessment, as well as the beginning of the change in the equation for ADA. But on the terms of the special assessment, Essex came out saying that at this stage, given the cuts that it will face, it will not support it. Clayton will be having a discussion with them later this week. But just so people know, as in I think, just to clarify what Jesse had referenced in our budget, unless there is consensus based on the charter of GMT, that segment would not go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Lori?
Just a quick follow-up. I had attended the two meetings that Andrew attended, the Climate Action Plan municipal meeting and also the Run on Climate meeting. And the climate change website that they've put together has a lot of very valuable information for anybody that wants more information about the work they're doing. And they have also put together a municipal vulnerability index, which is really focusing on where areas of vulnerability are in the state. And it's very interesting to look at for our community as we look at how we create resilience around those vulnerabilities. And at the Run on Climate presentation that Andrew did, and I supported a little bit, the main takeaway that I took from it was we're doing a ton of great stuff. The only thing that was brought up that hasn't been discussed here that we might consider discussing in the future is zero waste initiatives. It's a more state level conversation, but Minnesota has enacted a zero waste program for their state to get producers to take responsibility for the waste stream of their products. And something with only having one overburdened landfill in our state, it's something that we may locally, but as a state, want to be thinking more about. That's it for me.
Thank you, Lori. So I attended a planning commission meeting last week, I think the same one that Elizabeth went to, and in addition to what she said, there was a lot of discussion around a cloud of different types of uses that could be discussed. Instead of having individual uses, they were types of uses, and whether they were more commercial heavy or more customer facing, and we were trying to gauge the Planning Commission's feelings about how those looked. That was a really interesting discussion. I appreciated that. Also attended the Public Arts Committee meeting where they are talking about a new show after the one that's out here with Juliana Brazil. It might be a school-sponsored student art show like they had last year. And they also worked on their annual report. I also had a very nice Thanksgiving holiday, and I hope everybody else did. And I roasted a 21-pound turkey, and it was delicious, and I'm still eating it. We're all still eating it, and we will be for many more days. I just wanted to give a shout out and kudos to the UVM men's soccer team. They won 1-0 last night in San Diego in overtime. On a penalty kick, they move on to the fourth round of the NCAA Division I soccer championship, and this is excellent for UVM. Congratulations. I think it's the third year in a row that they've reached the third round. I also want to announce that on the climate action subject matter, my extended family has finally purchased an EV. They've moved on from a diesel VW to an electric vehicle, first time ever. And I think that's really great. So there is progress out there. I know that the growth in EVs is slowing down, but at least there's another one. And in reference to like wastes, the CSWD has emailed everybody, or if you looked in Front Porch Forum, they're conducting a survey right now, a very extensive survey about how you use their services. Do you visit their drop-off sites? Are you aware what the drop-off sites take? Are you aware of the rover, the hazardous waste? It's a really good survey to take because it gives them the pulse of the community and how much more outreach they have to do. So if you're concerned about how many tons of materials that we ship up to Coventry every day, right, and when we were given the presentation, you saw that like 40% of everything that goes up there could have been put into a recycling or into composting. And I think that's all I have. Jesse?
Thanks. So I want to start by just acknowledging that the state lost Dawn Turner this weekend. Dawn was a state rep and legislator from Milton for many years, was the minority leader in the House for many years, and left that service to became the town manager in Milton and left. And he was an exceptional town manager and really a mentor to a lot of us in the profession, and had a struggle with an illness and died way too young, and we will miss him. On to city things. We have the closing for the Wheeler Conservation Easement tomorrow at noon here in 301. We have some lawyers coming, and I will sign, and we will issue a joint press release with the Vermont Land Trust as well. So that's an exciting progress on that front. Also want to share that the police are doing a media push on, we're seeing a uptick in thefts from cars, thefts of belongings from cars. So they are doing a media push reminding folks to lock their cars, secure valuables, take your keys with you. This is a preventable crime. So please stay vigilant and help us share that message. I will share this, but Tom and Erica, if I screw it up, let me know. The vehicle detection hardware and software is all now installed and talking to each other and working on Dorset Street. So the system is collecting data and making iterative improvements to optimize that traffic flow. We will see that improve in the weeks and months to come, but it's a huge amount of work on Tom and Erica's behalf, and it's something that the community has been looking for many years. So thanks to both of you. And then some fun upcoming recreation events. We had 330 folks at the Fun Fest in the U-Mall the other day, which is amazing. Spark the Park is December 6th. It's a great event up at Vet. The Ugly Sweater Run is the 8th, and the Senior Holiday Dinner is the 13th, followed by the Community Chorus Concert. So hope folks can come and join us for those things.
Thank you, Jesse. I'll move on to item 6, which is the consent agenda. We have to consider and sign the disbursements. Part B, which is approve the minutes from July 1st, 2024, July 15th, 2024, August 5th, 2024, August 19th, 2024, and August 21st, 2024, I guess Mike has been very busy. Item C, which is appoint members to the Housing Committee. Sure. Items D, which is authorize the Department of Public Works to award the Heinsberg Road Sewer Rehabilitation Project to J. Hutchins Incorporated. And Part E, which is accept the deed of easement from 89-2 Realty Company LLC and Burlington Interstate Center LLC dated June 24th, 2024 for the pedestrian and bicycle bridge over I-89 at exit 14. If we have no objections, can we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
We have a motion and Mike seconded it. Is there any discussion? Although, yes.
Can I clarify? I had asked the question on disbursements about the streetscapes total, and I know there was a link given to me to go to, which I didn't have an opportunity to do before the meeting, but is streetscapes a service or did we buy the equipment? That was a question, and just where the assessment of sidewalks was in terms of being completed.
So I believe you're talking about the consultant firm that is doing our sidewalk assessment. So they were the folks who were out riding scooters. They rode scooters along
So it's
every.
the service that we.
It's actually the service that we purchase, not any equipment, and they are in the process of pulling all that data together and giving it to us in a manageable way, so that then we can make recommendations and integrate that into our long-term planning.
That was my question. If we bought the
Service,
equipment or
not
the service.
equipment.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So we have a motion and second on the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, which is the FY26 budget. Received the city manager's proposed FY26 budget presentation with Jesse Baker, city manager, Stephen Locke, deputy city manager, and Martha Machar, finance director.
Great. Well, thank you to Erica for figuring out. I'm going to see your team's thing. So thank you to Erica for figuring out how to advance the slides. And it is my sincere honor to be able to present to you the FY26 proposed city budget. While I have the privilege of presenting this budget, I really want to acknowledge that I am the spokesperson of the department heads and Martha, who have spent a huge amount of time building this budget over the last couple of months. And many of them are here in the room tonight. So with your grace, I'd love to just point out who is here in case you have questions. So we have Steve Locke, our Deputy City Manager and Fire Chief. We have Erica Quallen, our Deputy Director of Public Works for Capital Projects. We have Chris Corbin, our Deputy Fire Chief. Martha Machar, our Finance Director. Sean Burke, our Chief of Police. Colin McNeil, our City Attorney. Tom DePietro, our Public Works Director. Paul Connor, our Planning and Zoning Director. Jared Pellerin, our Deputy City Attorney, Adam Math, our Recreation and Parks Director, Andy Broombaugh, our Communications Manager, Nick Gingro, our IT Director, Daisy Brayton, our HR Director, and I think I've hit everyone. Did I miss anyone? Oh, so this, sorry? Did I say Jared? Jared Pellerin, our Deputy City Attorney, twice. So this is the team that really has done a huge amount of work, and specifically Martha Machar for line by line going through our budget to try and present to you some options that we felt were responsible to maintain current service levels, but also sensitive to affordability challenges we as a community are facing and statewide, the state is facing in total. So, as in past years, we're going to walk through who we are and who we represent. We're going to talk about the FY26 budget goals and assumptions and scenarios, the capital improvement plan and climate aspects. We also have Holly Reese, our city clerk. Our enterprise funds, I'll give you a snapshot of our total budget. We did want to highlight for you the finances related to our tax increment financing district, talk about some emerging issues, and then next steps. Primarily, our goal for you tonight is really to think about these key questions. This is really the start of our conversation with you about this budget. We are clearly not looking for any decisions tonight. You will get much more information in the weeks to come. But our key questions for you are, which scenarios best meet the council goals? Are there options within these scenarios that you would like us to explore turning on or turning off? Are we missing anything? And what additional information do you need over the next 6 weeks to recommend a budget to the community? So that's what we're hoping you are listening for through this conversation. We always think it's really important to start with who we are and who we serve. So some quick statistics on South Burlington. We are second largest city in the state with 21,000 residents. We are a fairly well-educated and well-resourced community. We do have 14% of our community who speaks a language other than English at home, and that has risen over the last couple of years, which tells a really interesting story about how we are getting more diverse as we grow. We are also, you've heard us talk about this before, but at the tipping point of being a community of folks who live in multifamily homes versus single-family homes. So about 40% of our overall housing stock is currently residents who live in single-family homes, and only 18% of the, or 17% of the growth that we've seen in homes since 2015 has been in single-family homes. We are developing according to our transit service area, and of course 51% of our city's land is park space, conserved land, common land, or regulated at development. And then it's also important for us to talk about who we are as a staff team, who are the humans who implement your core services every day. So we have about 195 employees across 14 departments and 3 represented labor groups. We have 6 statutory committees and 9 policy advising committees, and 131 people who give time out of their months every month to volunteer on boards or committees. There's a lot of us. So moving into the budget conversation. So I just wanted to revisit where we have been in our past budget conversations. So on September 16th at your meeting, we had an initial conversation about the FY26 outlook, and you gave us in aggregate this direction. You asked us to continue this level of services we currently provide to the community. You are not interested in cutting a particular area at this point. You asked us to maximize our non-property tax revenues and really look at our fee structures to ensure that we had parity across communities. And you asked us to present a number of budget scenarios for you to think about, and asked us to provide operational tax rates not to exceed 5.39%, which is what we experienced last year, 4.4%, and 3.4%, which was the COLA at the time. So what we've included for you tonight, and in the materials, all of these materials are linked off the council agenda, are 3 scenarios at 5.19%, 4.02, and 3.39. We didn't nickel and dime it to the point of hitting your scenarios spot on, but hopefully that's okay. It does not initiate any new programs. It levels services our current operations. And again, we are trying to minimize the tax impact on our community. We know that our community may see another year of very high education property tax rate increases. So we are trying to make room for that. I will say, as a personal commentary, I have no idea how to fix the educational funding system in Vermont. I am not smart enough to do that, and I'm really glad there are much smarter people doing that. It is very frustrating that the lack of a system in that realm is putting financial pressure on municipal services that I think are equally as important in our state. So while we are presenting you 3 scenarios, we are recommending the 3.39% scenario, and are presenting you some alternatives for you to consider as you go through this process. I do want to acknowledge, and I'm going to try, several of you have asked the really good question of at that September 16th meeting, we had about a 7% increase projected, and now we're at a 3.39% increase. And I'm going to try and walk you through exactly where that shift happened. A lot of it is in kind of high-level numbers we can give you, and honestly, a lot of it is in Martha pushing department heads to minimize every increase to every budget line we could come up with. The 7%, of course, was before the department heads had submitted their budgets. So really tried to go line by line through the budget to get to that 3.39 level. So, we all start with the assumptions built into this overall budget. It's a $55 million budget, so there are a lot of details in there. But I want to hit the high level assumptions. So we are assuming a 1.5% growth in the citywide grand list. That's based on an analysis that Martha and our assessor have done and Paul have done to look at the actual permitting data and what we expect to see on the ground as of April 4th or April 1st. I can't see the humans, so if somebody could mute somebody, that would be great. Thank you. We're also projecting a 20% growth in the TIF grand list. And just as a reminder, we only retain 25% of that growth in the general fund budget. We are also building out in this budget all of the contractual COLA and step increases we currently know of, and are seeing an 18% growth in our workers' compensation insurance. I want to call out specifically health insurance and pension because this is one of the areas where we saw a big decrease from the 7% that you previously saw. So as the council may know, we are part of a captive insurance program. So we are more closely like a self-insured community than a community that buys insurance on the open market. What that means is we pay the actual claims that our covered employees and dependents experience. Because of that, we hold stop-loss insurance. So if our claims exceed a dollar value, we have insurance to back us up. As Martha and Steve were meeting with our carriers this fall, they were able to renegotiate our stop-loss coverage to go from a coverage limit of $50,000 to a coverage limit of $150,000 and do the historic analysis about how many folks that would have captured or not captured historically in our captive coverage. And so through that analysis deemed that we could renegotiate at that level and not have a negative claims experience, financial claims experience. That alone saved us $374,000. So a huge win by Martha and Steve to renegotiate that avoided increase. So what it means is our total health insurance rates will go up 4%, not a projected 16%. Similarly, because our South Burlington pension program, which is our legacy pension program, all new employees are now in the state VEMR's pension program, but we do have employees who are still in this program. Because that has done very well in the market in the last year, our plan managers, we had assumed a 20% of salaries going into that plan this year, and they are recommending that we only need 17% to stay at a healthy ratio. So that's an additional avoided increase of $163,000. Right now, we are projecting a property and equipment insurance increase of 6%. I do want to note that that is tentative. We have not received the final numbers yet, so that may increase as you see final budget documents. How are we doing? Any questions so far?
Jesse, just to understand the stop loss. So going forward, in the past we were covered if costs exceeded $50,000 per person,
Yep.
And now we'll be covered if they exceed $150,000 per person. So we're going to be absorbing that 100, but I guess we don't think it's going to hit that much, and in exchange for that, we reduce our premiums.
Exactly.
It's like raising the deductible on your car insurance on collision,
Yep.
sort of, yeah.
And can I clarify, Jesse, that the 374 and the 163 of cost avoidance were baked into the original budget we saw in September?
Yes,
The
those were much
7%.
higher numbers. Yeah, exactly.
And why did the workman's comp go up so much? Is that provided to us by VLCT or?
No, workers' comp is Hickok and Boardman. Martha, why don't you just come on down?
Come on down.
So workers' comp, honestly, most of that increase is due to increase in salary and numbers of staff. It's a percent of comp. It's not necessarily claims. You can just come here with your laptop. But she's giving me the thumbs up.
And finally, the reduction in the city contribution to the pension fund, does that need to go before the pension advisory committee, or is that something just internal to the city? And did I miss some discussion at the last pension meeting, but maybe this is new.
No, you did not miss discussion. So that is the city's contribution into the pension plan. The percentage that is contributed is normally based on how the plans actually does. So Eric, at the end of the fiscal year, will look at the numbers and say this is what the city needs to contribute to the plan, in addition to the employees who contribute into it as well.
So Eric, the actuary, said it was okay to do this?
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Martha, so at what percentage is the pension funded with that lower contribution? I assume it's still pretty high.
It's pretty high. I think it is in the 89, high 80s.
Okay.
Yep. And he will be presenting in January.
I noticed there are a number of different health insurance programs. In the federal government, as an employee, you have an option to choose through various federal insurance programs that service them. Is that the same true at the city? There's a variety of different health programs city employees can choose from, or how does that work? I'm just curious because I thought I saw different names.
No, we do not have variety to choose from since we are captive. We only partnered with CBA Blue.
Okay, I thought I saw some different names in there, but maybe I'm wrong.
And finally, the property and equipment insurance, is that just because of who is that from? VLCT as well, or Hickok and Boardman again?
Back and Borden.
Okay. And they're just, we have more stuff that is more expensive that we are covering and,
Yep.
and okay. Did their rates go up, or is it just a matter of what we're covering?
The rate went up a little bit, but also the value of what is being covered went up. And with that, the increase, because the replacement values are higher, that increased the value of what we're insuring.
And our liability insurance is based upon payroll.
Oh, okay.
So as payroll it goes up, sort of their numbers for our liability.
So if we outfit a brand new police car, does that insurance cost more than a police car that's 5 or 6 years old, or it's a newer vehicle and it's probably worth more, right? So
They don't provide us the breakdown per vehicle cost insurance. They just pool it all together.
oh, they do.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks.
Great questions, thank you. So those are our overall budget assumptions. We also did want to note that we are seeing some partner cost shifts to municipal funding. So as Councilor Scanlon has referenced a number of times, Green Mountain Transit is obviously a pretty big driver of that. So here you see the increase in the fixed routes cost, the paratransit cost, and the disability cost, which is very small. And the special so I want to be clear, everything for GMT, everything above the special assessment is currently built into all of your scenarios. The special assessment, we're recommending that if you choose to fund that moving forward, as Councilor Scanlon mentioned, that we use fund balance to fund that this year, since it's a special one-time assessment, not a ongoing operations cost.
So it's a question for Mike. Is it still looking like they are going to need that special assessment?
They are. It would all depend on what the legislature does, because it's about how to fill the 2 million gap. The gap has gone from 3 million to 2 million, so there's been progress. But at the current moment, it looks like we'll have to make cuts, and with that will come having to have separation of some employees, because obviously the number of people needed will decrease. The goal here is to have the ability to do buyouts, because otherwise you basically, by the charter, have to separate newer hires. And what all that does is you maintain higher costs, and you basically don't get to where we need to go. If the legislature meets some of the needs with additional funding, as the request is, then the special assessment will probably not be required. If it doesn't, the cuts will be required, and therefore it's just prudent for us to help them basically give the option to buy out sort of senior people who are a couple of years away from retirement.
So if the legislature comes through, but we've budgeted this into FY26, what happens then if there is no special assessment?
So that's why my recommendation is that you don't budget it, you don't build it into the operations budget. You use fund balance if the request comes in, because
Stays in fund balance.
it stays in fund balance until it's needed. because my understanding also of the special assessment is that it will only be charged at what's used,
Correct,
not
correct. So it may not even
payment.
be that if depending on what the state legislature, if it does provide anything, that number could go away all completely or go away in part. But as I said at the moment, that also requires all 10 municipalities involved to support it, and one has already formally got on the record as unlikely to support it. So that is another unknown.
And if one doesn't support it, then nobody pays.
Correct.
Right, okay. Thank you.
And then the bottom two are conversations I've mentioned to you briefly in the past. Community outreach, which is our contract with the Howard Center to embed outreach workers in our police department at a regional level. It's a shared program with many of our municipal partners. Had a funding shift of historic Department of Mental Health grant that we had received, so that cost is being passed on to the municipalities. And then there's an ongoing conversation at the legislature around community justice centers. We have a community justice center in our police department that primarily provides pre-charge restorative justice work. It is hugely successful, and I think the chief will share with you at the retreat that it's an asset not only to our neighbors, but also to our officers who have something to offer to victims and offenders. So we have built into this budget additional funds to help ensure that that service stays locally in South Burlington.
So these two increases, the 81% and the 256, are embedded in the budget.
Are baked into the budget.
Okay, thank you.
I should note that we are also for community outreach, because that is a new cost. We are recommending using $25,000 of your opioid settlement money to help offset that increased cost.
And Jesse, can I clarify with the shift, and this may fall in the dumb question category, but was there any budget transfer, or is it just coming into municipal governance? Because these were
transfer.
provided, or these expenses were provided before at some level. Was there any shift of the budget, or did grants just sunset and now it's up to cities to pick it up?
So if I'm understanding your question, and correct me if I'm not, so two different answers for the two different programs. So community outreach historically has had three significant funding sources: municipal contributions, this department or this grant from the Department of Mental Health, and funding through the University of Vermont Health Network. The municipal and UVMMC funding streams are staying the same. Howard has shifted that grant to a mobile crisis unit that the state is now requiring them to offer. So DMH has reallocated those funds within Chittenden County away from community outreach.
And does that mobile service provide any level of support for South Burlington?
So the chief and I have been having that conversation very actively with the Howard Center. So they may. It's a kind of wait and see thing. It's also a bit duplicative of, sorry to get in the weeds, but a service that the Howard Center provides called First Call, which is, crisis interventionists. As folks likely know appropriately, the state has a real priority over ensuring that services provided across the state are equitable across the state, very important. But one of the things that means is for Chittenden County, where there are services in place already that are trying to be replicated in other places in the state, the models have to look a little different because what we can do here, other counties can't do. So it may be that the Mobile Crisis Center responds with community outreach. What community outreach has told us, or what the Howard Center has told us about community outreach, is that likely they will co-respond to things, and they won't have the embedded in our police department's priority that community outreach has. So that, to our perception of that, is that would be an incredible loss to our provision of public safety services. And the chief will talk. Chief, feel free to jump in here if you'd like.
Those embedded services have been
Hugely effective.
incredibly effective and supportive of the system.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed. Councilor Fitzgerald, to go back to your question though, the Community Justice Center is different. So community justice centers have historically been funded solely through the Department of Corrections, passed through grants to either municipalities or nonprofits statewide. During the last session, the services were separated. So what we do, which is called pre-adjudication services, so before a case gets to the court system, is now to be funded out of the Attorney General's office, not out of Department of Corrections. And while that shift has occurred, there's been no funds attached to that shift. So basically, DOC will defund us, and we don't know yet whether the next legislative session will fund the pretrial services. It's also very likely that they won't fund. Right now, Chittenden County has 4 of these centers. It's likely that they will only fund 1 or 2 in Chittenden County. So we are trying to ensure that we have some capacity within our general fund budget to make the strongest argument we can to the Attorney General's office in the state that these services are really critical to our police department, and we would like to keep those services as closely connected to our police department as possible.
Thank you.
You guys are great questions. Okay, so very simple, very straightforward slide. I know it's really confusing. It's the simplest way Martha and I have figured out how to talk about this. So at the lowest scenario rate, we are looking at a 3.39% increase in the tax rate, or 1.7 pennies. The total impact for the average condo owner would be $50 a year, and for the average homeowner would be $75 a year. I do want to note that is for the property tax bill, not the utilities. We will get to the utilities in a moment. I also want to note that the pennies for open space and pennies for path are increasing at 3.14%, or about $13,000 each. So as a penny raises more money because the grand list grows, so too do those pennies.
Are these average condo and house impacts, are they calculated with the 40% of the households getting a discount on their property tax, or without?
So the average assessed values are the full assessed values on the grand list, which is how the assessment works. And then as folks submit their income taxes to the state, the house value and the family's income is taken into consideration to do the homestead prebate. So this is full amount, and the prebate is really focused on the education property tax side, not on the municipal side. This is municipal only.
Sorry.
No, good question. So I'm going to walk through these 3 scenarios. Folks ready for that? Up for that? Mm-hmm. So I do want to note that these scenarios build off of each other. So the scenario at 5.19% is our highest level scenario, and articulates the big changes that we made in this budget as compared to what the department had submitted and what we reasonably thought was responsible to bring you the most conservative budget possible. So this scenario on the revenues, so you have revenues on the left-hand side and expenses on the right-hand side. On the revenue side of the equation, it level funds local options tax and interest on our earned interest revenue lines. It level funds our electrical inspection fees. It avoids, or it increases our permitting fees, which nets a new $20,000. It includes that opioid settlement money to be used to offset the increase in costs of the community outreach team. It does increase ambulance billing by $277,000 to reflect having 2 ambulances on now for a full year. And it also includes $853,000 that we used in the FY25 budget of ARPA funds for capital and other expenditures. So it removes that as a revenue stream from the budget because we no longer have access to those funds. On the expense side, it fully funds our climate consulting line at $75,000. It fully funds our planned public safety radio replacement CIP item at $250,000. And it includes this new community justice funding at $40,000 that I just talked about. So that's.
Jesse, can you just go over the ARPA expiration line again? Just to be clear, does this change the ARPA reserve that we have?
It does not
Okay.
change the ARPA reserve at all. Nope.
And were those funds, Jesse, one-time expenses that sort of are not in a run rate, so don't have to be made up?
So that's a good question. The half of those funds, about 440,000, were ARPA funds used to fund the climate portion of the capital improvement plan last year. So they were part of our CIP that we are hoping to increase every year. So it is, assuming we want to keep doing that, we have to replace those funds. And then there were a number of items that were funded in FY25, a number of specific one-time items that were funded in FY25 with ARPA. Heinsberg Road intersection. Do you remember what the other ones were off the top of your head, Martha, from last year? Parks and open space. Well, that was, I don't think that was in the FY25 budget. I think that was a mid-year. We can get back to you on that.
Yeah, I think I'm sure I will have a question sort of reconciling ARPA funding. I know that was in the back of my mind for the entire budget process. I think the community might be interested in that as well. But when you say CIP, I would normally consider that one time, but you're saying that would be the portion allocated to climate action would be something we continue, the plan anticipates continuing to fund.
So the plan anticipates continuing to fund our fleet replacement and our weatherization and things like that. What we did last year was figure out the difference in cost between buying a gas vehicle versus a Kona, and that difference was the CIP climate money that was used for ARPA, or that ARPA was used to fund that delta. So assuming we want to continue down that path, those are new dollars we're going to have to come up
I just have to wrap my head around what is a one-time improvement project versus what's an ongoing stream of investment. Thank you.
So I will just, while we're on this, skip ahead a quick minute to the CIP slide, which is, we'll get into details here, but one of the things I do want to call out is we have had a priority over the last, going now 5 budgets, to annually increase our general fund allocation to CIP. Historically, that's pretty wildly fluctuated based on needs in a given year. The prior council adopted a CIP reserve fund policy, which let us aggregate money over time. So we didn't see those big increases, which would really drive tax rate increases. So we're trying to get to the point where annually we are increasing our general fund tax capacity obligation for CIP in order to, one, maintain our infrastructure in a healthy way and level off those big increases. Okay. It's catching up. There we go. All right, so that's our 5.1% scenario. To get to our 4.2% scenario, we start getting more aggressive. So everything from the top carries down, and we add in getting more aggressive with local options tax revenue and increasing that by 5%, not 4%. Getting more aggressive with our earned interest and increasing that to $1 million from $800,000, and all the same expenses from the prior scenario. Martha and Steve and I are comfortable with getting more aggressive on these lines. What it will mean for us operationally is we will be tracking these very, very closely. As you probably remember from last year, we have overspent these lines historically. It's part of what's building a fund balance. As we get more aggressive and they're not coming, if they don't come in at the same rate, we will have to look at budget lines where we don't spend in a given year. It's a very typical budgeting thing.
Hey, Jesse, do you know how much more option tax revenue would be anticipated to be raised going from 4 to 5? What are the numbers there?
Yes, Martha can look that up for you.
And while she's doing that, when you say more aggressive on interest, you mean more aggressive on projecting. We're not actually moving accounts and earning more. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, more aggressive on projecting. Good clarification.
A lot of Black Friday Amazon purchases might help. And don't forget to shop locally.
Yes.
We also looked at the increase, the rooms and meals tax, what we hope to see on this street. So there's more businesses. So, again, it's a projection, but in a place that we feel really comfortable with.
The difference between a 4% and a 5% increase is 52,000. 52.
And Martha, what do you feel will be the deposit interest rates that we'll see next year? Could you look in your little crystal ball and be our oracle and tell us what will the stock market do over the next 12 months? And
I wish I had a crystal ball, but I do not. I think the increase that we're just projecting right now is not based on it's based on where we are right now, but also based on how much money we would have in the account. I know as we build the fund balance, that amount on interest, and that interest is what we are budgeting in here. And we hope that with the decreases on the interest rate, it will not be a decrease from where we are right now. We only get 80% of that, and we are right now at 4%.
thanks.
Is there a full number, just like with the lot? Is there a difference between what you would project for the under the 5% scenario and the more aggressive 4%? How does that as a dollar figure change?
I can
So
do
this
that
is
quick.
for the earned interest. The earned interest is just going from $800,000 revenue line to $1 million revenue line. So it's just adding $200,000.
Adding 200.
Yeah.
We're assuming that rates might hold steady and that the deposit amount might increase. Are those the two factors you're thinking?
Correct.
Okay.
So then to get down to the 3.39% increase, again, this builds on what you've seen above. So all of those things. It also on the revenue side has us reopen the inspection fees and increase those electrical inspection fees for an added $215,000 revenue line. It includes all the same expenses as above. However, it shifts our public safety radio replacement funding line in our CIP, takes $50,000 out of that line this year. But that doesn't mean we change the overall replacement schedule because that replacement will be required the year we have other debt expiring in the amount of $50,000. So we can make that up on the back end. It does reduce the climate consulting line to $30,000, but because we won't have filled the climate manager position for half the year, allow us to specifically carry forward any balance in that $75,000 line this year into next year. You would have to vote on that, but that's our rationale there, is that it would kind of shift into FY26. So all of that together gets us to the 3.39% recommendation.
Justin, you have a schedule of the what the electrical inspection fees would be after the increase. I'm not sure. Have we seen that?
No.
Could you share that?
So most of that increase is within just bringing it to what our FY24 actuals were, and then only about 15 to 18,000 of that is new money. And
So it's changing the projection, not really increasing the fees?
I think about 20,000, 15 to 20,000 is new projection of fees that we're gonna bring to you in the spring.
Okay.
The vast majority of that is bringing it to the FY24 actuals.
Just truing it up. Okay.
And this does not include single-family homes, right? Because they're still not inspected?
That's correct.
What would it take for us to get those inspected?
We will bring you the ordinance change in the spring.
In the spring? Okay, all right, okay. But it could be effective like next year?
Mhm.
Okay, and we're not building a lot of single-family homes, I understand that, but there are a few.
It's more of a safety issue than it is a financial issue.
Right. Do you have the manpower to do it, the person power to do it?
We'll bring you the all one
Okay.
package.
I'll wait. I just want to make sure that comes up because I'd love to see that done. Thanks.
So with that baseline at 3.39%, we also acknowledge that there are a lot of things that are not included in this budget that you may want to talk about over the next 6 weeks. So with a 3.39% scenario as a foundation. We've built this, what Martha and I are calling, or Martha's built, I did not build it, Martha built it, this on-off spreadsheet. So what this allows you to do, or allows us to do, is toggle on and off these items or any other items you would like us to toggle on and off to see what the impact might be on the property taxpayer. So for example, what's shown here is funding all of these things minus the double Town Meeting TV options, and using ARPA created fund balance to pay for the climate related CIP projects we were previously talking about, to get to a 3.25% increase, for example. But we can, over the next few conversations, we can play with that toggle on and off spreadsheet, or you can play with it on your own. Is that clear what this is here?
Can I just clarify that were the budget add options from staff?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and you did ask that. So we have heard a lot from the community that there's interest in opening the library on Sunday. So that came from what we're hearing in the community. State statute change. You heard this presentation from Town Meeting TV at your last meeting. So we are now required to archive a lot more public meetings than historically we have. So that's a statutory requirement that we have to figure out how to achieve. The one-time funding for the airport in Chamberlain came from staff as a conversation that we have heard repeatedly at the council level and the planning commission level around how we best integrate Chamberlain with a really important airport asset in our community. I'll be honest, that one I believe is one-time funding, and we should use a different funding source, not build it into an operations budget. We've heard lots of interest in increasing our line striping budget historically, so we wanted to capture that. We've talked about the CCRPC Equity Advisor shared position across communities. So we didn't build it into the baseline, but we wanted to reflect it here. And then, of course, there's this use of ARPA to continue to fund climate-related CIP projects. So they came from staff, community conversations. This is an active spreadsheet, so you also, together or individually can go and add your own lines and play with other things you would like to play with, or you can ask us to do that for you and bring you back different scenarios.
And then do we have an equivalent sort of, this is a uses, do we have a sources that would represent reserves, the ARPA fund balance? I assume that's here. I don't know if that represents all of it, but is there any other sources, or are there any other sources that you would consider to be considered in this?
So this same spreadsheet can be used in the negative, like a revenue being a negative. So I don't ever recommend using one-time fund balance to pay for ongoing operations. So you can do that. You can say, we want to use $1 million of fund balance to buy down the tax rate. That creates a hole that we have to dig out of in the future. You could ask us to come up with a scenario that gets even more aggressive on other revenue streams. At the retreat, you will see from the department heads individual rates they would like you to consider changing for fees, so you could get more aggressive on those things. And Steve is looking at me like he has something he wants to add.
I was just going to add on that this budget add-on, there were other, and Jesse will talk about it under emerging items, there were other requests that we're choosing not to include in here that you'll hear about on the 12th, but those are not listed here.
So I have a question about these add-ons. The 3.25%, is that saying we would add 3.25%?
No, so that's...
We did them all?
So this is saying, this is taking your baseline 3.39% budget. Mm-hmm. So assuming you're saying yes to all of that, which you don't have to, you can change it.
Yeah.
And then saying, see the blue column there?
Yep.
If you add all of these items where there are numbers in the blue, including the use of ARPA fund balance, so it's a negative.
So it's reducing.
Then your total tax rate impact would go from 3.39% to 3.25%. There are other scenarios like taking out the 70, and we have the spreadsheet, I can put it up if you want, but taking out the 75, deciding to open the library on Sunday next year, where that could get down to as low as 2.5% with the use of ARPA funds.
But this basically uses ARPA to pay down the tax rate.
Right, it does do that.
Which will come back next year and haunt
Have the
us.
same challenge.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, as Steve alluded to, what is not funded, what is not in any of those spreadsheets, is a funding request that we anticipate receiving from SB3C for the new downtown organization and city center. Does not include the final numbers for our property and liability insurance, although it could be 6%, we don't know yet. It does not include any funding requests from the Safe Routes to School Task Force, and it does not include any funding for a recreation center, as you had previously talked about when Patrick Leduc was here a couple of meetings ago. So we can bring you scenarios that include some or all of those, but right now that's not in the baseline 3.39% budget.
Do you have a sense of what the SB3C request is going to be in terms of order of magnitude?
I was not at that meeting, but I believe others were.
We have Bob Brittis here. He might be able to speak to that.
It's still in draft form, being worked on, so nothing solid yet. I would think that. Oh, sure.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Bob.
No problem. No, we're still working it out.
By yourself, please. Identify yourself.
Oh, sorry. Bob Britt, member of SB3C's board right now. So again, we're still meeting on putting together our package for City Council. I still do not know how much is already baked in to the current budget, but we're thinking, I believe, if I understand how much is already baked in, that we're looking about for 35,000 additional incremental to what I think is already in the budget.
And those would be an ongoing request.
It can be, but the total request would shave off over time. I mean, basically the organization thinks that the city will want to contribute to it going forward because we're going to be hopefully creating more sales tax revenue. Also property tax revenue by creating a more vibrant city center. So we think that the city is going to want to continue to contribute, that it won't only come from members of the organization, businesses, residents, et cetera. So we do think that the city is going to want to continue to be a partner going forward. But I'm speaking out of turn because I wasn't prepared.
Thank you.
Okay.
I believe you will hear from them at your next meeting, formally. So we talked about this a little already, but the capital improvement plan is in your packet. Is a very detailed 10-year plan of how we are going to invest in capital and the main projects we are going to focus on over the next 10 years. Highlights in this budget include increasing the paving budget to $1.25 million. That is for the streets on the current 2025 paving list and the remainder of Dorset Street. It includes $40,000 for sidewalk improvements, the ash tree program continuing, energy upgrades, boiler replacements, and IT infrastructure. And continued investment in our fleet.
And that 1.25 for paving is for next year's budget, but we still have $1 million from this year's budget that we applied to Dorset Street next year, right? And I see a thumbs up from the Public Works Director. Thank you very much.
And a tentative additional 100 from surplus, right?
Included in this number, or is this additional to this number?
Additional to that number.
And another 100 from surplus?
That you previously approved.
Okay.
So as I mentioned previously, so similarly to last year, we looked very closely at, as we continue implementing our capital improvement plan, where are there climate-related costs associated with that CIP? So what this is a snapshot of a very long document. In red, you see the climate impacts, and you also see what was in the FY25 approved budget and in the FY26 proposed budget. So $1.1 million of capital projects this year includes $345,000 of climate work associated with that 1.1. So of that 1.1. And of that 345,000, 244,000 is planned to be funded with new general fund dollars to, again, get off that one-time use of funds.
Hey Jesse, may make sense to explore this during our retreat, but just to make sure I understand how this was constructed, and maybe just as an example, focusing on fleet. I see there's like 20 that's indicated for climate action for fleet. Was that the Hyundai Konas? Is that like just? Can you help me understand how we came up with that?
Yeah. So I will try, but given that I have your computer, Erica, do you know this off the top of your head? Okay. Can you come up?
Hey there, Erica Quallen, Deputy Director of Capital Projects. Like Jesse had mentioned earlier, the climate portion for fleet in particular is the difference between a traditional internal combustion engine or whatever we would have gotten had it not been for the hybrid or electric options. And so that is the over and above.
No, so I know she said that, but I just wanted to drill down to make sure I understood, because like a Hyundai Kona, I know we're getting 4 of them. List price of like 30, federal tax credit 75, GMP kicks back another 2,000. Those cars should be like 20 a piece. So are they more expensive than what we would have otherwise gotten? Is that what the, and maybe we could talk more about this at the retreat.
So the Konas are funded out of FY25, so they're not in this budget. But yes, I think we can give you a more full breakdown of exactly what the costs are associated with each of these climate actions.
Okay. And then when we come up with those costs, are we then somehow figuring in the savings? For instance, if we get an EV, right, the maintenance and electricity is probably less than what it would be for a fossil fuel car. Are we figuring that in?
We haven't done those projections in the immediate and some of the implementation plans. I believe we started looking at it, but haven't done the full life cycle costs. Because we have some of those upfronts of installing chargers, things like that, but we have not done that at this point.
I was going to ask that a similar question, because the $30,000 extra for the fleet vehicles, I know, having owned a electric vehicle since 2017, my operational costs are a fraction of the operational costs. And for instance, on Wheeler House climate action, $10,000 to weatherize, it's not talking about the operational savings that those $10,000 are accruing. So in my judgment, as I look at these, quote, climate issues, they're not looking at the accrued savings that they will actually be benefiting the city in our ongoing budgets. Is that correct?
Well, I'll say this: the vast majority of our vehicles are large vehicles, excluding the police department, right? So Public Works and Fire have the most of our vehicles. Most of them are big, heavy vehicles. Electric vehicles not an option, and the maintenance cost on those are what drive your. We're not putting much money in the maintenance of our small administrative vehicles. All of our maintenance costs come in our big trucks, which are really expensive to repair.
No, I totally understand that, but those small vehicles consume gas. They have to be serviced X number of times a year. An EV uses less than a quarter of the fuel costs and skips all the service almost exclusively. It's so that $30,000 actually is providing another savings line for the budget, as is the weatherization that's being done.
I don't know that it's so much a savings as we're just not adding it into the expense line. So we may not see the expense line grow as much as it would have otherwise.
This is capital versus ongoing budget expenses, right?
So you may not just see grow the operational expense item grow as much because we say we're going to be, and perhaps the fire department's a good example, we didn't raise our fuel as much as we would have because we know we're going to have 2 electric vehicles.
Yeah, the point is there, we're kind of, I guess, separating out. This is a presentation question, right? The budget is what the budget's going to be, but it's a presentation question. If we're going to separate out how much we're spending on climate action, it would be good to know how much we're saving as well, as a presentation matter.
I think, Lori, when I heard what you're saying, you're really looking for the offsetting savings and sort of the net impact. And I think the challenge is it material enough from a reporting standpoint? But I do think it brings up a good issue of there should be some operational savings. And maybe the way to look at it is what are the bigger ticket items that significant investments have been made where there are either material now or anticipated savings associated with those investments so that that picture can be painted on big issues, whether it's fleet or whether it's facilities, things like that.
Well, it's $1.25 a gallon equivalent versus $3.16 a gallon. It's no oil change. You still have an inspection cost. You still have tires. You have any other wear item that's associated with driving for a long period of time, whatever it is, right? But there are some other small incidental savings, but that's the primary savings there, on top of the fact that you're not burning something to move from point A to point B. Yeah, and I don't know what the city's retail rate is for a kilowatt hour, in consideration of the panels that you have on top as well. So it may be less than 19 cents kilowatt hour or whatever.
Speaking to what Elizabeth was saying, it is a presentation issue. And when I, as a taxpayer, see we're spending $345,000 on climate, my response is, oh, I can't afford that. But that doesn't speak to the savings that those expenditures are also offsetting, or the expenses that they are offsetting. And so I think that from a presentation standpoint, it's harder to justify if you're not showing those offsets.
We will do our best to show them as part of the retreat.
For that saving though, can I just add, so if you look up there, there's the energy saving column, and that column is the saving from, so we do the math to calculate the saving
Hold on
from
a sec.
the solar panel up here.
Can you start over so everyone can hear what you were saying?
So if you looked up there, so out of the 354, only 244 is general fund. And the difference is funded with other revenue streams. And one of those is the energy saving. So we do the calculation of what we are saving with the solar panels that we have up here. And a few years ago, the lighting at the police department building would change to LED light. So we do those calculations as well, and those are tracked in the separate funds and are now being used as a revenue stream for the different.
So maybe we just need to do that more fully for some of the other lines, for some of the other rows.
But also to better explain that so that hearing that from you, that makes total sense. I didn't understand that the difference is calculating offsets already. Did I say that
So it's
right?
historic offsets.
Yes. Thank you.
Let us take a stab at doing this for you for your retreat.
Thank you.
Okay to move on? So the other side of our $56 million budget is our enterprise fund. So as the council knows, these are our utilities, water, wastewater, stormwater. They are paid by the same folks who pay our property tax bills, but they come on your utility bill, not your property tax bill. So these rates are going up significantly. We've been projecting that for a number of years now. This primarily is driven by planned capital projects, the upgrade to the Bartlett Bay wastewater treatment plant, to the water tower specifically. here is where we are making an added staffing change. So within the enterprise funds, we are adding 1 FTE for the Bartlett Bay wastewater treatment plant. Right now, that plant runs with 1 staff person on duty. That, to me, is a huge liability for the city. It's a fantastic employee who's been here for decades. As they near the successful completion of their professional life, we really need backup there, especially as that plant is modernized. We need to have 2 people in that plant. And then 1 FTE is to support pump station maintenance, and you'll hear more about both of these from Tom at your retreat. So with these planned increases or proposed increases, that will add another $68 a year to the annual homeowner. So then we wanted to give you a quick snapshot of the total budget, so enterprise funds and the general fund and our pennies budgets. So our total FY26 proposed budget is $55 million, and you see 64% of that is in the general fund and then split out across the other funds. And then to get a sense of what the operational areas those fall into, so 76% of the total $55 million budget is within core municipal services, public infrastructure, public safety, police, fire, EMS. Public Works is obviously significantly bigger because not only are they are very staff heavy, but they also have a lot of stuff and need a lot of materials to do their job. The remaining quarter of the budget is really administration, finance, HR, city clerk, recreation and parks, libraries, you all at a whopping 0% of the budget, and other things. So
It looks like we're too much.
hey, you show up.
What's our annual stipend again?
So I want to spend just a couple of minutes on TIF. I'm not going to go into a full education session on tax increment financing. The council has talked about that quite extensively this year, but I thought it was important to mention it in this presentation because FY26 will see the start of a lot of construction of our last remaining TIF capital projects. So in FY26, we'll see the start of construction on Garden Street, the Boardwalk project, and potentially other projects as well. So spending millions of dollars on capital, so I think it was important to mention in this presentation. And you see how those expenditures are spread out throughout the life of the TIF district. So we did want to revisit, just as a reminder, I put this in the presentation so you could go back to it as a reference, our TIF model that we track throughout the year. So you have seen these before. This is our updated scenario 1 of the TIF model. This assumes all of the projects that are currently permitted and under construction in the TIF district are built out, which there's no reason to think they wouldn't be, but nothing else is built out in the TIF district. So no other property redevelops, no other green field is developed. That leaves us with a $2.9 million deficit in our debt service on our TIF projects. So that's money that the taxpayers would have, the municipal taxpayers without the ed fund contribution would have to make up. And it has us leaving the TIF district in FY40 with $900,000 of new new general fund dollars into the general fund. Scenario 2, which is the scenario you've seen before, is we see, starting in FY27, we see 1 new Union Place, which is the building on the corner of Garden and Market on the healthy living side. 1 new building like that constructed a year, which is a big lift. But this, if we continue at that pace, we've chosen that to give you a visual example of what that could look like. Then we retire the TIF debt on time and end the TIF district with $1.2 million of new general fund a year. So this is to say we need to continue to see growth in the TIF district, and we need to take active policy action to ensure that that happens.
Quick question. If we were to obtain the goal in scenario 2 with that balance, what would it take to retire the City Center Reserve Fund contribution? Would that need a city vote or just a resolution?
No, that's a council. You would need to build that into whatever budget
Budget.
you bring
Okay.
that forth to the community. It would be part of that budget.
Yeah.
Primarily, that is, so if you see the line right below that, the city share of project costs, that is primarily the debt service on this building that is not TIF eligible.
Oh, right.
So
Okay.
some of that debt service will continue.
That's going to go on.
It's going to go on.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Jesse, just to help me foot this, can we make these two charts, the lines look the same? So I'm just confused. Like in the first chart, we're footing down to cumulative balance reserve. And the second chart, there's two lines to foot to that are named something slightly different. Can we just make those charts a little more uniform?
Sure.
Thank you.
So with that, I think it's always important to talk about what the additional emerging issues are. These are in part not included or more anticipated for for future budget considerations. So as you know, both of our AFSCME contract and our police contract expires at the end of this fiscal year. We are in active negotiations with one and anticipate starting the other soon. We also have some very hard to fill employment categories. So CDL drivers and police officers are proving very hard to fill, and we are looking at solutions through contracting to rectify that. We can continue to see emerging mental health and substance misuse needs of our neighbors and see that impacting municipal operations. We do see an emerging staff need for city center maintenance as we build all this new infrastructure in city center that has kind of unique maintenance needs. We're going to need to account for that somehow. The city clerk's office is seeing a lot of increased traffic at the city clerk's office as city center builds out, and as we see multiple elections every year with more complicated election lists. So we anticipate in a future year coming to you with requests for those. With the added climate and data professionals coming onto our team from this fiscal year, those initiatives will be under development, and we may have asks related to those on the climate front or the data management front. We've talked about community justice. We've talked about needing to continue to prioritize growth in city center. Currently, the Planning Commission, as you all know, are looking at the form-based code, which is the zoning in city center, as a way to incentivize more growth. And then, of course, we are actively working with a consultant to develop a paid parking plan for city center. And I want to be really clear when I say creation of a parking fund and new structure. I am not talking about a physical structure. I am talking about an operational structure. So as we are implementing paid parking and enforcing paid parking, we will need humans to do that work.
Question?
Yep.
For the parking fund and its structure, right? Is it possible to inject discussion of how to automate a notification to residents that there's a plowing event that's going to happen, so we don't have to have a parking ban?
Yes.
So just that discussion
Yep.
at least? Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
Again, can we get to that discussion, actual physical structure, for instance, like the double-decker parking, and what we as a city, if anything, can do to rehabilitate that or use that more efficiently?
The one on Market Street, so that's private property. It's not.
How do we incentivize something happen there? There's also one emerging issue that I don't see here that I think is going to continue to be an issue, which is addressing the unhoused population issues that we're seeing increase, and how we as a city are going to be able to address what will be ongoing expenses for that.
Yep.
Or service needs.
Good call. So with that, going back to our key questions of what scenarios best meet your goals, what options should be turned on and off, what are we missing, and any additional information you would like in the next 6 weeks. You've given us a lot of that feedback already, but want to revisit that. And then just a reminder of where we're going. So December 12th is the budget retreat with the council and leadership team, where you'll hear directly from the department heads. At your December 16th meeting, you'll have another discussion among yourselves and set the public hearing date. January 6th, you'll have another opportunity to hear from the community before you make a final budget decision. And then on January 13th, you'll hold the public hearing and take action to send a budget to the voters. At some point in January, we'll have a steering committee as required by our charter. And then, of course, town meeting day is March 4th with the pre-town meeting presentation ahead of that. So with that, I will, anything else, any other questions you have or data elements you would like us to look at? And
Do you want feedback right now on the recommendations or suggestions from us?
yeah.
I just want to put in a voice for not using ARPA funds to pay down the budget. I think that having seen that happen in our small municipality and what it does year to year for the budget, I would strongly urge us not to use one-time funds for ongoing expenses.
Jesse, can we get a projection of what we think it will cost to, next year and the following years to make the improvements to our sidewalks and shared use paths that may come out of the assessment that is being done, and or the recommendations from Safe Routes to School, and or the feedback from the public that Tom gathers on the website when the public sends in areas in the city that need attention? I'd love to know if the $40,000 we have budgeted for sidewalks is sufficient, and if not, what number we think would actually be realistic to meet those needs.
And the results of the active transportation plan.
So we have none of those data sources yet. We don't have recommendations from Safe Routes to School. We don't have the data from the sidewalk assessment. I think looking at Tom and Erica, we could do very back of the envelope modeling, but it would be very hypothetical at this point. That's part of why we have been pushing for some of these earlier. But we can do a back of the envelope analysis.
And is that possible to do with some of the other things that we've sort of set up in terms of the master plan, the economic development fund, the culture fund? Just, I know they're going to be macro numbers, but just to give us that when we make a decision, what is the future we look for? Sort of going back to what Elizabeth was saying, are some things that we start, do they have increasing costs going forward? And do we just need to be conscious of that? Because, you went through this exercise of cutting, as I did the back of the envelope numbers, about $1 million to get us down to this 3.39 number. As we commit to doing things, what are we committing to? To give us a sense of the context. And also to get a bigger sense, perhaps it would be helpful, if not now at the retreat, just understand how the special funds complement what we're doing. I know that in our city plan we have these objectives, whether it is the network of paths, whether it's the sidewalks that we've mentioned. There are funds here. I went through the list, and it's pretty impressive list of funds and challenge opportunities. And I'm just trying to understand how they meld together with the broader picture of our budget and these special funds to achieve what we're trying to do within the city plan.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, a couple of things. One, relative to the paving and the pent-up paving project, I still have a concern just about our ability to bring labor to that. But I also would add, having seen the press and the physical logistics of major projects in Winooski and Main Street in Burlington and so forth, I think that communicating with the community and really being planful about those disruptive projects is critical. So I think that should be part of, and this is a significant investment, and there's a fair amount, there's a lot of pent up here. So it's just an observation of having seen a couple other neighboring communities and some of those challenges. The two other areas I would highlight is I would want to put a plug in. We all agreed as a council at our last retreat that executing against the city center plan is strategically critical for South Burlington. So to put a plug in for the pretty modest budget that I think you'll see from SB3C at our next meeting, that really is a part-time individual to start to coordinate those efforts to really bring together and create a culture of a downtown. So I think you'll hear more, but to me that is a modest investment to start to continue to realize the ambition we have with City Center. And then lastly, with the reconfigured housing committee, there was an ARPA funding request around a housing needs assessment, and I could anticipate something similar to that, but the potential need for some modest investment at a minimum to really look at how to introduce that education to the community around opportunities to leverage the revised LDRs into new housing opportunities that address more of the missing middle. But those are a couple observations I'd have that really, they got covered a little bit, but just some thoughts. Thanks.
So my primary observation is I'm really grateful to all the departments for this hard work in achieving a projected 3.39 as a lower tax rate increase, because I think we're going to be challenged in March, because I think the schools are going to be greatly challenged to present a tax rate number that the public will vote for, because I think last year was a testament to the fact that the public is not happy, and that the result of the recent elections also is a testament that people are not happy with property taxes in general, right? So I like the 3.39 number, and I look forward to the budget retreat so we can hammer out a few more numbers and go from there.
If I could add to that and fully subscribe to everything that Tim said, we've touched upon this a couple of times about, and I think this exercise has at least shown to me the importance of also thinking about how we grow revenue. And you mentioned that as a necessity for the tip area, that if we don't, we'll basically be having a bill to pay back instead of maximizing the output. But I think that has a larger context of we have a lot of ambitions, we have a lot of things that we would like to do, and I think are going to come out of a number of these task force or these groups that these studies that we're initiating. And I think aligned with that needs to be some sort of what are the decisions we take that help us grow revenue? And I think educating us on that was important. And I assume we have this data analyst. This is going to be a part of the discussion. I think it should be an active part of our discussion. Otherwise, we will be up front facing more than 3.39 and have to go every year through this challenging exercise.
Well, Mike, they already showed that they were going to increase fees for certain things, and
right. But I also think there's the question we've talked about, the lot, and how we can basically have a more active insight into the lot. There's also options of how do we grow.
Could you restate that? I don't think people understood what you meant.
Sure. We basically have empowered Jesse to talk about how we can get more insight into the data that makes up the local option tax. That would allow us to make policy decisions that would help us grow that, in the same way that we could hopefully make policy decisions in the areas that are designated for commercial growth. Are there things that we can do to help grow commercial growth that will help grow the revenue of property tax derived from commercial facilities? Right now, there's about 8.5% of our properties, if I'm correct. I think it's 8.5, 8.7, generate 34.7% of our property tax. And we have these designated areas in Tech Park, around the airport, and are we doing much as like we're going to have to do in the city center, everything that we can do from a policy initiative to help grow commercial ventures in these areas that help us continue to generate the revenues while maintaining sort of a reasonable tax like we're talking about today.
Well, I think the growth that you've seen in City Center is a testament to the work that Planning and Zoning has done with all of the work that it took to create City Center in the first place. And it's on a path to construct more housing. So,
right. It's not just about housing. I think if we would go back to the last discussion where Paul talked about that the planning and zoning is going to look at for the next 4 or 5 months how they can create greater flexibility in the two sort of general areas, as I said, the tech center and the airport, to help us create an environment that helps those companies that have come here to do well and to attract others. And I think that's an important factor for us to think about as we go forward, because we're talking about this year's budget, but ultimately this is a multi-year process that we'll continue to revisit. And so I think, at least for me, just like understanding better the special funds, understanding how all these different pots of money or how we can grow more money gives me more confidence as we go forward with policy decisions.
Thanks.
Following up on that, I just want to ask, first of all, the future council actions listed here, when will we be addressing those?
So what that box is meant to capture is once you have a budget that you are sending to the voters that you've made some assumptions in, like increasing fees, then we will ask you to take a vote on those. So it will likely be either the last meeting in January or the first meeting in February.
Okay. I also want to echo the appreciation of the work that you guys have done. And I'll leave it at that for now. Oh, the other thing I was going to say was,
Keep going with that. That's fine.
yeah, well,
Just kidding. You don't have to keep going.
I know, but you guys did a lot of really hard work, and it shows, and it's really appreciated. And if the Vermont Digger article that I saw today didn't have a typo, it looked like there might be some relatively positive news about the property tax issue from Montpelier. And so hopefully we just can knock on wood that there's some reality. There was some about a 5.9% increase, and I didn't know if that was missing a 1, but if it is 5.9, we will be in a lot better shape than we have been.
So do we want to get public comment at all?
I would encourage you to.
Anybody in the audience want to make a comment at this time? Is there anybody online? Who can ever can see those online? Are you gonna, okay.
Is Bob Fisher,
Bob?
one of our staff, has.
Bob Fisher, would you like to say
on.
something? No. Turn off your camera. But nice to see you, Bob.
So Sandy's on the
Sandy, you have something? Can you come up, please? Okay. And remember to turn on the green light and identify yourself.
Okay. When you had to sing about mental health
Can
and
you
substance,
identify yourself?
oh, Sandy Dooley, East Terrace, South Burlington. When you had to sing about the list and the increasing mental health and substance abuse of our neighbors, is that our residents or neighboring communities?
Our residents.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I was trying to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? Nobody online?
Just a question on.
You know, people can't hear you, so you have to come down. You're being recorded.
Bob Britt, 3 Adams Court. The meeting on Thursday that was listed, is that a public meeting? I didn't see it in the warning, so I didn't know if that's a public meeting or.
Yep. So it's next Thursday, the 12th, not this coming Thursday.
Oh, that's why I haven't
So
seen
not
it.
warned yet.
Okay, so it's.
But all the meetings of the council are warned public meetings. All are now required to be recorded and posted and available in lots of options.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right, if that's it, we're going to move on to the next item. Thank you, Jesse, for the presentation. Well, come on down, please. I know this guy. Is this going to be a sexton's comment? Yes. Identify yourself, please.
My name is Peter Taylor. I'm a sexton with the city. How do I go about getting cemeteries included in the dialogue? I didn't hear it mentioned tonight.
Come to our budget retreat and be the first person there.
Next Thursday, I'll be there.
Okay.
What time's the meeting?
6:30 a.m.
I'll be there.
Just kidding.
I'll bring coffee for everybody.
9 o'clock.
9 a.m. 9 a.m. Anybody else? All right, thank you very much. Moving on to item 8, which is discussion and possible action. Receive a request from Champlain Housing Trust to re-envision their previous allocation. No LY.
Hey, thanks, team.
Yes, thank you very much for coming tonight. Sorry to keep you. Golf clap. To re-envision their previous allocation of $400,000 of ARPA funding to support weatherization at Dorset Commons. And is Miranda is it, oh, there you go. How do you, Lescas? Okay, I got it almost. From Champlain Housing Trust. Good evening. Make sure that green light is on. You just push the button once if you.
There we go.
Can you
Can you
get
hear
it
me?
close to the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, I can hear you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Miranda Lescaz from the Champlain Housing Trust, and I appreciate the opportunity tonight. I'm here with a request for a change to, as my memo suggested, the city funding that CHT received in 2022 to extend a road and infrastructure towards the back of the old municipal building to support building 8 new duplexes in partnership with Habitat. This infrastructure would occur as part of a planned renovation of the existing Dorset Commons neighborhood. In our work, we call renovations such as this preservation, housing preservation, so holding on to and extending the useful life of our existing housing stock. And as we've begun the project planning for this renovation and the potential for new units, we've encountered several challenges to installing the infrastructure for the new units. These include that the city parcel would need a zoning change. The school department now leases the city parcel, adding a third partner. We've learned that zoning regulations would require, in adding any new units to the neighborhood, it would require building a new second access onto Dorset Street. A portion of the existing parcel that we intended to use for a stormwater system was just classified as wetlands, and so we may need to use some of the area we considered for new units to meet new stormwater requirements. And then lastly, just the cost of construction has increased substantially. So for these reasons, and because the timing requirements of the ARPA funding are looming, we don't think we can advance the infrastructure portion of the project and meet these deadlines. Right now, we really need to focus on the renovation, which needs to happen as soon as possible. As we've worked to advance the renovation project, we recognize the great opportunity here for a deep energy retrofit. Dorset Commons, like a lot of the city and the state, is buildings built in the late 70s, early 80s that really need energy improvements. We'd like to improve the building envelope with air sealing and insulation. We'd like to replace inefficient heating systems with modern electric HVAC equipment that also provides air conditioning and ventilation, and improve the efficiency of the hot water systems. So luckily, there are funding sources targeted to energy efficiency work through the Inflation Reduction Act, and we are going after those. However, they're mostly low-cost debt, and construction costs are at an all-time high, and the renovation project costs really exceed the funding sources that we can go after. So the request before you tonight is, with gratitude for the previous award, we would like to request a returning of the ARPA funding and to ask the council to support a future request of funding for this energy efficiency in the future.
Pretty straightforward request. We haven't transferred any funds at all, right? It was just an allocation, right? Can you go into some detail about the weatherization work that will happen on these homes? Because if they were built in like the 70s and 80s, were they electric heat to begin with? Does anybody know?
There is a portion of each unit has a small, electric resistance heat element, and then there are kind of Rinnai-like gas heaters as well, propane heaters serving each.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's
So will there be insulation work going on, or?
The renovation definitely plans significant air sealing and insulation. So we'd remove the siding, we'd replace the roofs, and we'd really be able to address those items at that time.
We'd be removing siding and putting on foam panels on the outside and
Yes.
replacing the siding as well, or just putting the siding back on? or-
Replacing the siding as
Replacing the
well, but
siding. This-
after fattening it out with continuous
Right.
foam board insulation on the
So
outside.
this would be sort of a slight rebuild.
I heard deep energy retrofit.
I did. A
means-
deep energy retrofit, right. So I was just
Yeah.
curious, I mean, what you were going to do. So this is a great idea. It's really great.
Would it include then also heating sources, taking out, say, the propane and putting in heat pumps?
Exactly, yeah. We would plan to electrify, so we would take out those propane heating elements and.
There's
and,
propane in there?
Sorry, I didn't mean propane. I
Natural
meant
gas.
Natural gas.
Okay.
Yep, natural gas.
You said propane.
Original. Maybe that was originally.
Sorry, I did not mean to say propane, natural gas, heaters, and put in all electric HVAC.
When the woolen mill was being built, and I came here in '81, and I went looking for housing, and I visited their model, and I walked in and saw those floor-to-ceiling windows, and I said, "What kind of heat is here?" And they go, "It's electric heat." And I said, "See you later," because I just knew that was going to be really high electric bills. So.
Yes.
Well, this is great. Does the council have any other questions at all?
I have a ton of questions.
Sure, go ahead.
I am so confused by this project because I did look back at what was approved, and it was for the infrastructure and road and so forth and utilities, or water and sewer, I believe, and it was for 16 units of affordable housing, and it was characterized as shovel-ready. And that is in the 2022 minutes. So I'm really confused as to the ARPA funds that were allocated to this project, that it was characterized as shovel-ready in lieu of other projects that were presented at the time. This project, I believe, had some oversight by the Housing Trust Committee at the time. So I'm not clear how allocated funds could be returned without going through another process, but very concerned that the elements would no longer include new housing. And I understand there's a need, but it's fundamentally very different, and there's a time frame that is technically this month, right? To what's the actual requirement, Jesse? That
So the council needs to be under, or the city needs to be under contract with
under contract,
a provider to use ARPA funds
and then spent by 2026.
and spent by 2026.
We could do the same thing with these funds that we did.
Presumably
with
we've already
the
done that,
Eruv,
right?
That was two at once.
Anyway, those are
So-
some of my basic questions.
So yes and yes, you have created an intentional fund balance using ARPA funds for FY25 expenditures. So that intentional fund balance could be used to fund this or a different project in the future.
But just to be clear, then we must have already, as a city, spent this 400 in the general fund. It's not in the fund balance now because we thought it was allocated, but we'll just increase the fund balance by 400, right?
So when you approved so a couple of months ago, you approved us to use up to $1.7 million of ARPA funds on FY25 expenses. That included any dollar that wasn't currently under contract. So
Including
about
this 400.
Including this 400, and up to that limit. So you are covered, kind of accounting-wise, you are covered that way. I think that there's a couple of other questions in your question that I'd be happy to try and answer if you would like. Yes. Okay. So I was there. I think Miranda was there. I think Larry was there. So others correct me when my 2022 memory is a little shaky. So at that period, the council allocated $1 million for affordable housing projects. Together, jointly, the Housing Trust Fund and the Affordable Housing Committee came together and issued an RFP for projects. The development community that responded, CHT responded, other respondents responded. And this project, with my recollection, and others correct me, this project was deemed more shovel-ready because the requester had site control and had the idea of a plan. There were other requests that came in that were more hypothetical about if we were to buy property and if we were to do these things. Oh, Sandy was a big part of this as well. Sorry, Sandy. That's, I think, where the term shovel-ready came from, was that there was site control and there was an idea of a project that had gone through some initial preliminary design. As Miranda started, there are huge challenges, as we have worked together over the last couple of years to try and envision this project or realize this project. As she said in the beginning, there are multiple significant hurdles to achieving it. And quite frankly, we are down to the deadline of being able to contract for this particular project, but they are moving forward another project, hence the request. Elizabeth, what was there something else in there?
The housing component.
Yeah, so it's not a new housing component. That is the big shift. Sandy and Larry, did I miscapture any of that?
No,
more or less?
There have been work.
Do you want to come to the...
Sandy Julie. Kevin Dorn had proposed that he brought to the attention of the Affordable Housing Committee that there was land available behind the former City Hall. And so there was a lot of work about making the land available that would be needed for part of the housing. So that was part of the idea that this was part of a larger project on the part of the city to support the development of new housing. That's sort of all, but obviously all kinds of things have intervened. That was really it.
Yeah, Sandy's absolutely right. Kevin and the prior administration had many more conversations about kind of a land swap at that parcel, and that's of far less interest now to the parties.
And the school is now a property owner?
They're a lessee of ours.
They're a lessee, but do they need to be involved in that? They do, okay, because they're a lessee. All right. So,
Jesse, so presumably we'll be increasing, say, the opera reserve balance by 400 and maybe kind of set it aside for a future request?
Are we increasing the reserve balance, or the 400,000 is already in that reserve balance?
So the 400,000 is within the 1.7 million.
Okay. And the request is that you guys no longer are going to use it now. You're hoping that in the future we will have it earmarked for another project that you deem worthy.
Correct. The same location, but for a different purpose. That's right.
So do you have another capital project that's shovel-ready before the end of the year to take that $400,000?
No.
No.
No. Okay.
So I'm curious as to why the process that was followed for the allocation of these funds wouldn't be reinitiated. And there were projects that weren't funded for certain reasons. So if this funding comes back into, or I guess it exists now, but why wouldn't there be a process to have, whether it's a reinvigorated housing committee or any other group, evaluate, put out the RFP again, evaluate projects, and then use the allocated funds based on some selection criteria that had been used before that may or may not apply still? Wouldn't that be the normal process?
So that's a great question. And yes, I think that would be an ideal normal process. This council doesn't use that process much. It directly allocates funding often. So that certainly could be the prerogative of the council to say, take 400,000, take $1 million, whatever you would like of fund balance, and request that in partnership with the policy committee, we issue an RFP for community ideas. That's certainly an option for the council to consider. And I think, quite frankly,
I assume CHT could be part of that process, right?
Right,
They could
yeah.
submit an RFP again, and because we haven't really seen anything. I mean, this weatherization project isn't technically being approved because nothing really exists to.
Yeah, so we're not necessarily asking you to approve fund balance for this project tonight. That would be another council item at a future date when, when CHT was farther along in the process and had a full budget and all revenue streams and a timeline and all of that. Then I think they would come back and we would enter into some kind of grant agreement like we have done in other projects for such an award. I think we wanted to be transparent with you that a past decision of this council wasn't going to be realized, and then be transparent with you about what an option would be for the future. You have lots of options within that to look at. And I guess the final thing in this I would say is that I think you do also have kind of two very strong, very competing priorities, which is a climate priority around demonstrating to the community how you do a deep energy retrofit at a multi-unit building in partnership with city funds, and the hard priority of constructing new affordable housing in the city. And what the respondents to an RFP to achieve both of those goals might be very different in 2025 than they were in 2022.
Is it possible for us to, as you suggest, go down both paths? Because I definitely believe that in general, there tends to be more money out there for climate change actions than for housing. And the ideal is if we could do obviously both, but having housing in the city center, especially on a public transportation line, which is also part of reducing single occupancy cars use, is I think worth exploring if we have the time. As you said, we can park the money, we can do the RFPs, perhaps in both avenues, and obviously Champlain trusts can participate or even come back with perhaps how we can achieve both, which I think would be the ideal, is to have that housing and the improved weatherization, whether as a model in new housing and weatherization or some combination of the two. But I think we should not give up on trying to promote a more affordable housing, especially on a city bus route, which helps achieve a part of our climate action goals.
And don't forget that comfortable, low-cost, energy-efficient units are part of affordable housing.
Right.
Especially
so
for the
that's
landlords.
why I said, can we achieve both? Can we create? I don't think we should give up on one to do the other.
So I appreciate the transparency that you guys brought forward with this process, and I think the project sounds like a commendable process. I don't see being able to say these funds are going to be reserved for that at this point, but I look forward to, whether it be through an RFP or through a direct request from you folks, to exploring how we can allocate those funds in the future.
Through the Housing Committee.
Or through the Housing Committee,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
You're hopeful, I'm hopeful. Mr. Kupferman, would you like to address the council? Green light on?
Green light is on.
Yeah.
Larry Kupferman. The Housing Committee and the Trust Fund Committee was just approved at your last meeting and needs to be reappointed.
Tonight.
Oh, you
Already did it.
What was
Done.
on? Was that? Oh.
You missed it.
Yeah. So that was what I hope. Okay. So hopefully we can have a meeting in January and reconvene as both committees. I think that the new committee should take a little time in understanding how to hear proposals from developers for the trust fund. It could include some of these discussions if you so chose to pass that on to the committee in terms of. I appreciate that the money, that 1.7 or 4, is actually saved because there's time crunch. And just to respond to you a little bit, I mean, there's nothing normal about this money in terms of it needing to be spent on housing development within a 2 or 3 year period. It just doesn't happen that way. As we can see, that you just come up with all sorts of obstacles that take time to resolve. So I'm glad we have the ability to continue talking about that. So looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you.
So just to round that out, Jesse, what would be the process to have a discussion or to make a recommendation that there be? And I'm thinking of, there were other parties that, made proposals that weren't as shovel ready, whatever the definition of that was. that, you know, given the short notice, there's not a re-up process in this time frame, but there might be some interest. But and I don't know if that's the best way to move forward, but should we look to you and the city staff for recommendation on how to move forward on any projects that sort of fit this bill going forward, or what would be a normal next step?
So my recommendation, especially hearing this conversation tonight, would be that either the council votes or just head nods that you're interested in providing some of that reserve fund balance for housing. That could be new construction or weatherization, and that you task the newly stood up housing committee with looking at exactly what Larry said, how to hear these kinds of proposals from developers, maybe going back and looking at the Housing Trust Fund enabling resolution, I believe it is, and coming forth with a recommendation about this project and other projects, and have it be a committee-driven rather than a staff-driven conversation.
That sounds, yep, makes sense.
Yep. So,
I agree.
excellent.
Those were a lot of nodding heads just now.
Okay.
Nodding.
That's all the action you need from us, right?
Yep.
Bobbleheads.
Anything else, Miranda?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you. Do we need a break? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break right now. We'll be back with item 9.
And because they're described differently in both cities, like, it's like multiple.
Got it. I will rectify that.
Okay.
All right, our break is over. We're going to start the meeting back up with item 9. Is there anybody in the hallway that has to come in? Or no, it's Larry and Miranda. Okay. So we'll start with item 9, which is discussion and possible action. Receive a request to construct an Eruv.
That's pretty good, yeah. We'll go with that.
To allow for the carrying on the Jewish, now, I don't know if this is worded correctly, for carrying on the Jewish Sabbath Burlington, with a border running approximately from Queen City Park Road down Swift Street, then Spear Street to East Terrace, crossing Williston Road to Catamount Drive, featuring Michael Huffning, right, who's the president of the Eruv Committee of Burlington. Good evening. Is the little green light on your microphone?
It is, yeah.
Okay, great.
Fantastic.
So we need some background education here.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Yeah, so the background is that under Orthodox Jewish law, one of the observances of the Sabbath is a restriction on carrying outside of your home, basically. So if you're going from what's considered one domain to another domain, be it the street, somebody else's house, synagogue, anywhere you're going, there's a restriction against carrying items from one place to another. So that could be carrying a fruit salad, carrying a plate. The main issue for members of our community is pushing strollers falls under that category, as well as would wheelchairs. Pretty much any transporting one item from one place to another is considered to be kind of forbidden on the Sabbath. And to get around this restriction, because it's pretty restrictive, the rabbis over the years came up with this, I'll call it a legal loophole, essentially, that kind of creates one big domain where everybody can carry within these borders. The borders would traditionally be defined by kind of fences or walls in cities back in the day, and over the years, as that's become not really a thing anymore to have a walled city, they developed what I might describe as a legal fiction to allow creation of a boundary using essentially something that looks like a doorpost. So it's got to have two poles and something that goes over it that makes the doorpost, and that's kind of considered a legal wall by Jewish law. So and that's what an Eruv is. It's a combination of various domains into one whole domain. So you kind of create a border around it, and then you have to unify it with what we'll be talking about. So to create the border, currently in the United States of America and lots of other places where there are Orthodox Jewish communities, as much as possible they try to use existing utility infrastructure, because it contains most of the core elements. You have utility poles, you've got wire that runs over the utility poles, and you can use that to create your kind of, wouldn't go quite fictional, but nearly fictional wall. So what we've been kind of undergoing as a community over the past couple of years is trying to, in partnership with the local utilities, so both Burlington Electric and Green Mountain Power, we've been trying to get licenses to use the poles and wires for that purpose, and make these subtle adaptations where we need to. So essentially, and this was news to me, and I've been an Orthodox Jew my whole life and using these things, but didn't know the intricacies of how they worked until I moved out here and there wasn't one. But essentially, the wire has to pass directly over the utility pole in order to qualify as this kind of doorpost. So in lots of places that exists with no modifications. There are certain places where the wire doesn't pass directly over the pole, and in those situations we basically add a PVC pole. And if you guys saw in the attachment, there was this little picture with a plastic PVC pole that gets lined up to be directly under the wire, and that satisfies the requirements. So that's most of what we've done to create this border, so to speak, around the neighborhoods that most of the community lives in, or at least enough of the community that was interested in this project happening. So so that's what we've been doing. And then the last piece of it, so the council had actually approved our license with Green Mountain Power, I believe, sometime within the past year. I don't have the exact date, but the request before you today is that in addition to creating the kind of the enclosure, the boundary, part of the Jewish law stipulation is that you can unify it all into one, and to do that we require kind of essentially leasing the right to unify these disparate properties into one whole from a municipality. And that's what we're asking for here. So to my understanding, and to that of our attorneys, it doesn't really have any legal significance outside of Jewish law says this counts, but we don't own it for any other purpose other than to unify it for the purpose of the community being able to carry within its midst, if that makes sense.
I think I understand. So have all of the PVCs been attached already to the poles from the previous resolution?
Yes, to my knowledge, yes. We've completed the bulk of the work. There was, we're going to have one final walkthrough with a couple of things on the Burlington Electric end of things that still need to be attached, but I'd say 98% of it, and I believe 100% that's in South Burlington.
Okay. And you're creating sort of a spiritual corridor to allow people to, I mean, if pushing a stroller for, that's considered carrying is...
Yes, a pushing a stroller is okay. Considered carrying, and I wouldn't even call it a spiritual corridor. No? I would say that it's really kind of a very kind of Jewish Talmudic legalese. I wouldn't say that it even has much of a spiritual connotation to it. It's kind of like Jewish law says that this needs to be enclosed, so we're enclosing it.
So you're making a virtual domain as a transport corridor from one domain to another domain. So it's a workaround, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The way I understand it is that you can carry within your home.
Yes.
And the Eruv basically expands the definition of home.
Yes, yes. It's kind of creating one unified communal space, so to speak.
And it's essentially invisible to the community. Has no significant impact on our infrastructure.
Yeah.
Except these PVC poles that are already there.
Well, they're there right now.
Yeah,
We got
they're
permission.
there now, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I would be very surprised if any of you driving by would even notice them unless you were aware of
Never
where
seen
to
one.
look. Yeah, I could tell you where to look if you want to know.
I'm going to look very carefully now for some.
Okay.
So they.
Yeah. So the problem, even when you have the map in front of you, not every pole has a modification. The vast majority of them don't. So you really have to be keeping your eyes peeled.
Then we'll find every one of them.
I'm going to look for them.
Excellent.
So I support the resolution. I don't have a problem. Does the council have any other questions or comments? Or
I just have one technical question. In the resolution, there's a whereas clause that says Eruv borders may expand or be reduced in size at any time. By whom and when and whose discretion? I was confused by that breadth of that whereas clause.
Yeah, no, great question. So I think that the purpose of that clause is just to say if we decide to expand the borders, which we can only do with the permission of Green Mountain Power, and you'll see that the contract with them stipulates that we have to give them notice to anything that we're changing, and they have to approve that. But were they to approve that, we just wanted to avoid having to bother the council anytime something changes, and it just kind of gives some flexibility. Absolutely.
I have one question. All makes sense, as you have just said. It's really between your group and Green Mountain. The contract with the city council, the $1. It sounds like you have all the ability in your very detailed contract with the owner of the wires and the poles. I didn't quite understand the extra step that we're now being asked to take.
Yeah, so the extra step is just to basically the border kind of delineates the space, but Green Mountain Power doesn't own the space. Green Mountain Power doesn't have a right to any part of the space other than where their pole is. We're seeking to kind of take the space that's within it and unify it. So for that, you need essentially some form of eminent domain. I mean, this to be honest, this is something for our rabbinic advisor. I don't even understand precisely why this works the way it does, because I don't believe that the city council's whatever rights of eminent domain you have, it probably does not give you the right to just take over somebody's house. But I think you're the closest authority we have who can give us permission to use the space for this purpose.
This just codifies the space for you.
Exactly.
With the authorities that we don't. I mean, it's just interesting with the authorities.
You don't need them. They just need the authority.
No, that's it. No, I just find it I was just trying to understand the.
Yeah, does my explanation make sense? I'm happy to.
What action do we need to take? Do we just make a motion to?
I have questions. Sorry.
Hold on.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. I agreed with the question on the expansion or contraction of borders, because I did think that conflicted with the GMP contract. So I feel like the resolution should say consistent with the GMP contract. The resolution also grants the requested rights to the Jewish community of Greater Burlington when the memorandum council indicates observers of certain Jewish faiths. So I wondered if that should be clarified in the resolution. I had a question about exclusion of areas of the South Burlington community, like how were the borders defined? And then Mike, I don't know if you were getting at this, but I felt like the charging of any rent which is established a contract between the municipality and a private organization shouldn't be necessary. The resolution would just grant that acknowledgement. So I think there's two additional questions in there. One is definition of the area, and then I don't know if you can answer this, and maybe Jesse, the charging of any rent.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at both of them. So so to the first question of the borders. So the borders were basically defined by the infrastructure that we had available to us. So we would have loved for it to have been more inclusive of a broader territory, but what we needed was basically first of all, an area that would be checkable, because we do have to verify that these poles are up, and that's going to take some significant amount of time. But equally important, we needed it to be a completely closed loop, and there are very few spaces where utility lines cross Main Street. A lot of the infrastructure is already buried, and that was a question Jesse had passed to me about kind of, well, what happens if lines get buried? And the answer is we deal with that. We're aware that that could happen at any time, and we would be looking for some form of alternative route if it did. But that's how the boundaries were created, was kind of a mix of on-the-ground reality and also the manpower that we have of volunteers to do the work and not wanting to take on too broad of an area. And as to the lease and the monetary question, so that was inserted at our request. And again, I think it's kind of a symbolic Jewish law, wants there to be some sort of symbolic transaction, so that we're not just being given it, but we're actually paying for it symbolically.
My own feeling would be that it shouldn't be charged, but
we're okay with the dollar. Believe me, it's the least of it.
well,
I hear without them paying,
symbolic
it doesn't work.
symbolic becomes real when it's $1 or $100. So
They probably need that.
We have a budget consideration, and we have
Yeah,
a retreat on.
absolutely.
So, I mean, every little bit
Every
helps.
penny helps.
you know. And now I've heard for the first time a reason why you might not want to bury power lines.
There you go.
This is a really interesting aspect that you never could imagine. Well, everybody want to bury them, right? Because then they're not susceptible to wind and and other weather-related incidents. Nope.
Service to community is amazing.
Yeah.
All the little details.
No idea.
I had no idea. Is there somebody online that would like to comment before we make a motion and take a vote? No? Okay. All right, I see a thumbs up. Anybody in the audience like to make a comment?
I'm on East Terrace, I'm supporting it.
So I guess we just need a motion to approve this request to construct an Eruv.
I move to approve the city council resolution creating Eruv upon certain public roads, sidewalks, and right-of-ways of South Burlington.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
could I make a friendly amendment to include the language on the borders to include in compliance with the GMP contract? And then also,
Can you, Elizabeth, can you tell me what whereas you're in?
actually, I don't have the whereas. Yes, so it's whereas is Eruv the right pronunciation?
Yeah, there, you guys are doing great.
Borders may expand or be reduced in size at any time, so something in compliance with that. And then I think the other one is, actually I can pull it up here, take me a minute, where it says,
It looks different on her screen.
Thank you.
Than that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm,
The resolution, grant the Arab community, the Jewish community.
oh, yeah, it's at the end, now therefore, so grant the committee, and then it says the Jewish community of Greater Burlington, and I don't know if that's the right definition, but is there something that says observers, the information we got in our memorandum was observers of certain Jewish faiths. Is there better language that would define, because my understanding is this is not used by the entire Jewish community necessarily.
Yeah,
What's the right language?
The reason we chose that language is that in theory, any Jewish person would benefit from its existence, whether they're observant or not. They might not care to benefit from it, but its existence does benefit them.
So Orthodox or not Orthodox, you could still benefit from it.
Yeah. I mean, we have we have ongoing. Yeah, we have ongoing conversations with the conservative synagogue about kind of expanding the borders to include their synagogue as well. So it's just a more inclusive language.
Okay, well, I'm just reacting to what was provided, council.
Sure.
So just to be clear, I think the memo you're referring to is our city attorney's memo that I don't want to speak for him, but I think was being written in the broadest way possible versus the resolution that was the language that came from the community at their request. So I think that's why there's a mismatch.
I mean, as long as it's accurate to what's being reflected, that's all I'm saying. So I guess that amendment would only be with the compliance with the GMP contract.
Is council okay with that friendly amendment? Yes. And you have that?
Yeah, that's fine. That's
Okay.
fine.
It's okay? All right. And do you have that? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Ready for the vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And it's unanimous. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you for having us. and
Once we sign it, then it will be fulfilled.
fantastic.
Right.
And I guess
So-
I'll give Jesse the $1.
Saturday, I expect to see people pushing
We
babies
hope so, we hope
and,
so. I would
you know,
say.
casseroles or whatever. And
Oh my gosh, we really hope so. There's this one area with Burlington Electric that we still need to work on, and believe it or not, we need the entire thing to be closed in order to use it. So even one pole that's outstanding is going to hold us up, but we're hopeful that we can get it done by this Friday night.
At least we're not holding you up.
Yes, no, that would absolutely be.
Out of curiosity, you said you
accurate.
have to continuously monitor it because obviously.
Yeah, so it's
How does that work through the 12 months of Vermont's very challenging weather?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So basically, there's a certain assumption that things kind of stay where they are and utility poles don't fall, for example. But we also do want to make sure that it's still intact. So probably every other week or so, we'll do a drive around the perimeter to make sure things are where they are. And if something is not where it's supposed to be, then we gotta get to repairing it, which again will require the contracts with our respective utility partners. So GMP has one mechanism, BED has another. It's,
Assign poll watchers to certain polls, and then it's all
that
done.
would be that would be.
if you ever have any gaps that open up, you can call us. We'll come down. We'll take the bowl and
Oh, thank you for
carry
that.
it from one section to the next. Okay, and push the carriage. You know, we're service-oriented city councilors.
That is very kind of you.
Thank you for coming.
Michael.
Thank you, guys.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And Steve, can you run up and get the corrected resolution, please?
So we're going to move on to item 10, which is discussion and possible action to receive an update on the Northeast Agricultural Trust and the South Burlington Land Trust on a joint project at 1720 and 1730 Spear Street, currently called the Longview Project. This follows the council's approval of a letter of support outlining contingencies required for the city to allocate public funds to support city ownership and permanent conservation of at least 32.2 acres and the future development of permanently affordable homes on a subdivided parcel. This is a council requested item.
Do you want me to jump in?
Sure.
Tim and I thought it would be useful to bring this back to give an update to the community. One, we wanted to make sure that you all in the community saw the resolution that the VHCB board has drafted with their contingencies that's going to their board on December 13th. And of course, you have your approved letter of support with the criteria that you've already outlined. At this point, I don't think any additional action is needed. I just wanted you to have an opportunity to, well, one, we wanted an opportunity to brief the community on where this stood, and have an opportunity for you all to talk about it. My recommendation would be your criteria is set. VHCB has proposed a set of criteria. Let's allow their board to take action. If their board takes action and we need to revisit your criteria, let's do it after we know what their decision is or what their details are. That would be my recommendation.
And I concur with that. I think we've spelled out pretty succinctly what our conditions are in the letter of support, and we have to let other processes move forward to find out what VHCB is going to do. And I don't want to inject ourselves into that discussion because that's not literally between us, you know, and VHCB. It's VHCB and the Land Trust at this point, and NEAT. So I'm welcome to discussion from the council. But
I have a quick question.
Sure.
As I read their resolution, it seems like there were two conditions that they imposed, or at least one, that might make it so that our conditions can't be met. And does it make sense to send a letter to them indicating that so that they know that that condition is a problem for our involvement in the project?
I think we need to let them make their decision first before we weigh in on what our problems might be, especially with the developable land versus the NRP land, and because there may be some conditions that make it difficult for us to, you know, fulfill some of the obligation. But we won't know until after they iron that out. I mean, they may come up with an agreement that is fine, right? But we won't. I just go ahead.
Can I add one thing to that? So these conditions have been changed since they were first drafted. So VHB wrote a series of conditions, and then I don't know, but some communication happened at the VHCB level that changed that, specifically the 1C condition, to add the language that anything must be authorized within the use of the Open Space and Conservation Fund, which I think is a concern you're articulating. So I think the challenge for us in this moment is, until we know what the detail that they will accept is, it's hard for us to proactively respond to what that actually means.
So I'm comfortable with this because I think the email that you sent, Jesse, was accurate, that unless the conservation easement is over the full 36 acres, we can't use open space funds. They know that because you sent them that email, and hopefully they'll reflect that in their conversations. So I think we've communicated to them what we need to communicate at this point. Just one procedural thing. Can we attend that VHCB meeting? And if we attend, I mean, presumably if we'd speak as individual counselors. What's the process around that?
So right now, Paul Connor is our official city designee to that board meeting, scheduled to answer any questions their board has on behalf of, or regarding the city's position, which is your letter of support. So that's what he would be advocating for, is the criteria that you put in your letter of support. I believe that board meeting is open to the public, so I believe anyone can attend. It's a virtual meeting. There is 10 minutes set aside on their agenda for this topic.
That's it.
If you are going, if an individual the council can decide to represent yourselves and send one of you instead of Paul. That's totally within your prerogative. I have a personal conflict that morning. I cannot go. So you can decide to send one of yourselves or have one of you go with Paul.
Is it a hybrid meeting?
It is a hybrid meeting. If you go, my recommendation would be that you speak on behalf of the council, i.e. you speak to the letter of support this council has already adopted, which is relatively detailed. So that would be my recommendation.
We could also go and speak as an individual resident of South Burlington as opposed to a council member. Is that correct or no? Does that get dicey?
You can always do that, but you have individual freedom of speech. But because this body has had many conversations about it and taken votes on it, I out of respect for your colleagues, I think that's a
gets
challenge.
sticky.
I would just want them to be clear that if the land could be developed, we couldn't use open space funds. Just to make sure they know that. And they can choose to put their condition in, but that would be a significant change to the transaction.
And I think if anybody, Paul understands that concept, so he can communicate that if needed at that meeting.
Andrew, are you requesting that Paul do communicate that at the meeting?
Either Paul communicate or if not, one of us, honestly. But if Paul's going to communicate that, that's great, and I would just listen in.
Are you willing to take that on, Paul?
Come on down.
Just so we're clear.
Yeah.
Hi, Paul Connors, Planning and Zoning Director. So certainly the council's letter contains that information, so I'm happy to say that the funds that the council has identified are from the open space fund. The eligibility is for this. There could be a follow-up question that would come from the board of saying, would the council consider alternate funding sources for a portion of it? To that, I would say that's not been a discussion of council at this point. The council would discuss that if and when that was a question, but at this point it's not been discussed. That would be my answer to that question.
No, but I'm sorry, Paul, the thing that I'd want said, or I would say it, is this condition 1C in their draft is inconsistent with use of open space funds. That they just to ensure that they know that.
Is it?
I think so. I mean, it's either inconsistent legally or certainly inconsistent with the intent. Right? I wouldn't be comfortable using open space funds for land that could be developed in the future. I just wouldn't be comfortable doing that to the community.
I guess my point is we haven't had that conversation, so I feel like it's premature to put words in Paul's mouth that we haven't had.
Well, I guess we can ask our city attorney then.
Yeah. Come on down. It's a party.
I think, to me, again, maybe Colin's prepared to answer this tonight. This is why I think we need to hear their conversation and understand what their intent is. And I think that once their board has taken no action on this to date, these kinds of land agreements are always a negotiation over time. So if 1C is approved as written, and for whatever reason we deem that we can't use the funding source because of a stanza within this criteria, then we go back to them and say, for this project to move forward with us as a partner, this is what we need to see. And that, I will say, VHCB has been an incredibly communicative partner on this, and I think we would have an opportunity to do that in the future. But I think right now we're trying to guess at something that a board of directors hasn't had a conversation about yet.
But we do have their draft, Jesse, so we can have some communication prepared that speaks to their draft.
Okay.
My only thought was to try and eliminate the number of iterations we need to go through. So I hear what you're saying, and I respect it.
It's also very hard if a board agrees to do something for them to change their minds. It's easier to give them the full information in advance.
Michael Metag has his hand up. Tim.
Who does?
Michael Metag.
Oh, okay, I'm seeing. Hi, Michael. Did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to echo what was said. We can't use open space funds to buy land which is going to be used for something else, like housing.
Okay, thank you. Does the city attorney have a pre-opinion on this?
I mean, I am looking at it. I briefly looked at it before. I didn't look at it with the idea of coming up with an opinion tonight. I am looking at it now. I can speak to the fact that the open space fund is to be used for the purchase of preservation of open space and for recreation purposes. Those are the two uses that were approved by the voters. This 1C appears to say that the funds would be used, that the land must be used in a manner consistent with the authorized uses of the City of South Burlington Open Space Conservation Fund, which seems to be, it would be, whatever use it has to be, it has to be consistent with the purposes of that fund. So I think that right now it appears to be consistent with the purposes designated for the use of the open space funds, as written.
Which means that it could not have housing on it, is that correct? If it's for open space and recreation.
It's for preservation of open space currently and for recreation. I haven't dove into that, but I would say that common sense says that housing isn't open space, but it certainly could always be, if at some point the voters adjusted to say that open space lands can also be used for housing, that could change it, and that if the voters were to change that, the citizens of South Burlington were to change that by vote, and this language were present, it could be used for housing and be consistent with this language and be consistent with the uses for the open space fund.
If we change the resolution, right? The problem I have with this language is it says, under the city's ownership, it can't be used inconsistent with the open space fund, but one of the uses it contemplates is a sale. And sale is a use, right? And then it has to be developed. So it's kind of like honestly, their draft feels to me to have some incoherence to it.
I think one thing that is not clear with the authorization and the vote is that the land purchased with open space funds has to be permanently used for open space funds. The city could always get refunded that money and use it for another open space and then designate that land for housing purposes. So it doesn't mean that just because you used it for open space funds to purchase it, that it permanently has to remain that way.
And I guess, Andrew, my read of 1C and why I think we need to wait to see how their board talks about this criteria is that to the sentence Colin just read says it has to be consistent with our fund. And for their purposes, if it's ever resold in the future, they have the right to put some conditions on it. So it's protecting their contribution, not our contribution.
I just don't see how, if you purchased it with open space funds and if you put a conservation easement on it, you're never going to build on it. So I don't see how that's compatible with that item. But it says if it's subject to resale.
So I'm comfortable with moving forward based on this discussion. I would like to attend the meeting just so I can hear how their board discusses this issue. And attending and not speaking is not a problem. Is that correct?
Honestly, I would intend to attend and speak and say that as a city council, I would not be comfortable using open space funds for land which, if sold, must be developed. I just think that's not what the community voted for.
Well, it sounds like we need to make an agreement as a council if any one of us is speaking for the council. So if you did that without having approval from all of us, that would be overstepping a bound from my understanding of how we work. But is it okay to attend and not speak?
It's an open meeting.
I know, but I'm saying from the council's perspective, is there a problem? Does it get, if I go and speak as an individual, that gets dicey. If I go and listen, is that dicey or is that?
No, I don't have a problem with anybody going in and attending and listening, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I may just speak up, I would just caution you, if you do have a quorum there and if you are speaking amongst yourselves, even if you're not speaking at the meeting, I would certainly have a concern that you're engaging in a public meeting that is unwarranted, and I would strongly caution against that.
Okay.
And do they run the risk of being asked to give an opinion? What would be your advice to them because
So
I see someone from the city council there. Do you wish to weigh in on this issue?
So VHCB has requested that the city have a representative there to speak on their behalf, which currently is Paul. Based on this conversation, and I'm inclined to say what you guys should decide among yourself who to go and not put Paul in that position.
I think, for me, I share your view that Paul knows the issue. We have corresponded it. We provided the letter. I know I did not sign on to. I did not support the motion, but I think again we should follow process, and I think we continue to sort of turn what a sort of normal process is to achieve an outcome, as opposed to let's have the process go, they'll respond, and then we'll have an opportunity to act on whatever their decision is, which may be a moot point if they go forward with what you guys are asking for.
I'm confident in Paul's representation, and I won't be attending.
You will not be?
I will not be attending,
I
no.
would like Paul to represent us, and if I attend, it will be virtually, so there's not the ability to have a conversation with any of my other counselors.
I may attend, and if there's less than 3 of us, I may speak.
And I'm interested in attending, and I would not speak.
So you might be attending, or you will be? So that's 3 people attending. I thought we didn't want to have a quorum there.
You can have a quorum present as long as you're not engaging in public agency business.
Okay.
So as long as you're not talking amongst yourselves or engaging in business, there's nothing preventing you from attending a public meeting.
All right.
Can,
And if we're
can
virtual, we can't talk.
Can we address VHCB?
I think it's, I don't know if you're asking for a legal opinion here is terms of,
No,
I
if
think
there's a
there's
quorum.
council procedures or
If there's a
public meeting.
quorum, can we address VHCB?
It's getting awfully close that you're talking and engaging in public agency business at that point.
And if there are 3 of you or 2 of you, I wouldn't use the chat session to talk to each other either, okay? But I would, my advice would be not to attend and let Paul handle it. Or the fewer of you, the better, right? And then get a report back from Paul. And maybe the meeting's even recorded, I don't know. That's just my advice. Let that
If it's
process.
recorded, I'm fine. I just want to hear what their board conversation is in relationship to this item.
Okay.
That's all I'm interested in.
I would love to know if my fellow councils agree that they would not want to use open space funds, notwithstanding the discussion we had for this. Because if so, we should let VHCB know that, because it could change their discussion, which would be really important.
Well, I think Paul understands that concept, but their language is so convoluted over what to do about the 6 acres. I'm not sure if that's well understood, because I don't know how you apply a conservation easement with a resale covenant that could then develop it into housing.
Well, they don't want. No, I guess the point is that they don't want to. My point is that, we can spend a lot of time talking some more about the legalities of this, but as a counselor, I wouldn't be comfortable using open space funds with this condition. And if we feel that way as a council, I think it would be important to let VHCB know that.
Well, we can let Paul know that, and I think we're letting him know it now.
Are we? Okay, fine.
I agree.
I've not heard that, just to be clear.
Okay.
I've
no,
heard it from
I
Andrew. I've
agree
not
with-
heard it from the council. So
I
right now,
share this opinion. Absolutely.
And I would like to see this process go forward with some semblance of integrity, that the HCA has been partnering and received information and is going to go through their process. I would like to see how they process the information in each of the partners' documents and make their decision to move forward without anything other than affirmation of the letter of interest that was shared by council.
Elizabeth, there's an additional item that's before us now we didn't have before when we signed that letter, which is this draft condition. And it'd be useful to provide VHCB information relevant to this draft condition as they deliberate. And if this council won't use open space funds, if this draft condition is there, that's a really relevant piece of information for them that we wouldn't have had the ability to convey when we wrote the first letter, because we didn't know about the condition.
But it's their condition.
Yeah, it is. And this is a public meeting to share information for them to then deliberate.
You're off, just so you know.
But it
I
becomes,
do agree with Tim and Andrew on this.
yeah, it becomes us negotiating, in which we've asked city staff and delegated staff to participate in this process. So the clarification part of it, to me, Colin indicated what is in our open space fund approved by voters. So that's what should be shared.
And Mike, do you share our opinion?
I share the original intent, which was the process to go forward with. We've already responded. I think it's clear in the letter. If asked, Paul will convey what he's told us he would convey, and to me, I think that's the correct process. I think we're just inserting ourselves way much into this process. You know, we've done this from the very beginning in terms of bending over backwards to try to create an outcome even before we've seen all the parts. We have talented staff. We're very fortunate to have them. We all praise them for their budget. I think we have no question in their competency, and I would leave this kind of work up to the staff. We've given them guidance.
This is a policy question for us, Mike. Would we use open space funds for that? Paul's asking this council, would we? I think he's heard from three of us that we would not, and I'd like that information conveyed so that VHB has all the information they need as they deliberate.
So what I would recommend at this point is one of the three of you make a motion about what you want to tell VHCB, and we will put that in writing in communication to them tomorrow, because it could change other things.
So I move to communicate to VHCB that the City Council would not approve the use of open space funds with condition 1C as written.
Okay, I'll second it.
Okay, is that a second? Do you want to modify that at all? I've lost the train of thought as how I wanted it.
And what Colin had suggested that there may be a way to basically you disagreed with him or you didn't see how it worked, but Colin seemed to suggest that if you use the funds, that part of that could be taken out and resold and used in a different way. I mean, what was actually how did you phrase that, Colin?
I think the motion on the table right now.
Right, but this is to amend it with the understanding that there is this possible step, if that's the case.
I think, Councilor Skin, I was speaking to what the open space funds could be used for. I think what Councilor Champlain is talking about is a policy direction from the council of whether we want to use open spaces for this purpose or not.
And that would be to pay for the 6 acres of developable land.
As I understood it, the motion on the floor is to express a desire to not, that the city council's desire would be to, or not even desire, the city council would not be willing to use open space funds for the purchase of these 6 acres as conditioned in 1C.
That is the motion.
And can you clarify the conditions since they were modified? What was the last modification to the condition? You'd mentioned it, Jesse.
It's what's in 1C in the resolution, so it's.
The second time you said they made that slight modification from when they first submitted.
It's in the
yeah, if she could just
agenda.
explain it to me.
So how they changed from
What's
the
the
initial
significance of
resolution
this?
to the second resolution was that they added language to say, I'm just going to read it because it's their language. Approximately 6 acres will be excluded from the conservation easement, but will be subject to a restrictive covenant set forth in the conservation easement, requiring that under the City of South Burlington's ownership, the property must be used in a manner that is consistent with the authorized uses of the City of South Burlington's Open Space and Conservation Fund. The 6-acre exclusion will also be subject to resale restrictions in the conservation easement in order to ensure that if conveyed, the property is used for affordable housing, with any conveyance of the exclusion being subject to VHCB approval, which may be provided, conditioned, or denied in VHCB's sole discretion.
Can I clarify, Jesse, that the section you just read was under South Burlington Land Trust?
What?
Whose resolution is this?
This is VHCB's resolution. This
Oh,
is
that
the
was
resolution
the question I sent to you.
Yep.
So
This is-
what's the title of it? This was to South Burlington Land Trust?
South Burlington Land Trust is the applicant. So this is VHCB's resolution regarding the South Burlington Land Trust application for Longview.
Okay, so I was looking at the letter that got sent that referenced, it wasn't in the resolution, but I think the resolution clarified that this means that the property can be used for open space purposes in perpetuity. But so that's in Bill's letter from VHCB, and then the resolution is below that, correct?
I don't know what you're looking at.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, got it. Okay.
So we still have a motion on the table. And Paul, you want to make a comment?
Sure. So, the challenge with motions is that the board may have follow-up questions to that. So what about C is what the council's not happy? Does the council not want to see it at all? Is it the fact that it is excluded from the conservation easement? Is it the resale portion of it? That's, if there's going to be a dialogue, that's where that becomes complicated, is that
It's the resale. It's the use. It's the
Not perpetually.
that this requires housing to be built on the 6 acres if it's sold, which is not, in my mind, consistent with using open space funds.
Okay, I think if I can add a quick note, I think, city manager's note was that I think from VHCB's perspective, that's a protection to them, because if it's not in the conservation easement, there's nothing that prohibits the city from selling it, subject to our own rules. So they're protecting themselves at that point to say that if the city, for whatever mechanism that they don't know about, because they don't know our internal mechanism, sells it, then it must be used for this. I think that's the challenge, is removal of that part of it removes their protection, because they're not responsible for how you use your funds.
My understanding of our original letter of intent was that the council was interested in being involved in this so that a section of the property would be available for the housing by Habitat for Humanity, and the rest of it would go into permanent conservation easement. That's my understanding of what we originally agreed to. This would change that and say that 6 acres could potentially be something else in the future, which was not what my understanding was when we did the vote.
Specifically develop into housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was not part of what we originally voted on.
Right.
So what I would like to have communicated in this is that our original intent in using the open space funds was to conserve this property.
As open space.
Not to conserve part of it, but to conserve all of it. And that by pulling some of it out of that conservation easement, it changes our willingness to use those funds.
We don't think we can use the funds for that.
Right.
Well, not
would-
can choose
would
to.
not.
Willing to.
Right, I
policy
think that's
decision.
the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can I maybe simplify this? Maybe make it more. So I think maybe the hang up is how it's written here from VHCB, where they would hold the permanent conservation easement. They are pulling out of the 6 acres, but saying, South Burlington, you can do whatever you want, but if you don't conserve it, we want a first right of refusal, basically.
Is that what they're saying? So
I think that's what they're saying.
They're happy for us to give a permanent conservation easement on the 6 acres to somebody else?
So that's where I was trying to simplify this. Would you view this differently if it was, we are allowed to put our own permanent conservation easement on the 6 acres?
I would.
But what happens to the housing option? Or does this not affect the housing?
The 3 of them don't want a housing.
The 16 units of housing are still being built
On the 2.5.
on the 2.5 acres.
You're basically taking 6 acres that is potentially developable out.
That was the original intention of the agreement, yes.
Because the 6 acres are also potentially conservable.
So where I was going is to give Paul more clarity in this motion. Would a friendly amendment be to communicate to VHCB that the city council would not approve the use of open space funds unless there was a permanent conservation easement attached to the 6 acres?
I'm comfortable with that.
That sounds good. Yeah.
So I'll reframe my motion as Jesse just stated.
I'll second the reframe.
You ready for the vote? Yeah.
Can I read it just to make sure
Please.
that
Yeah.
Paul and I have the language
Yeah,
correctly?
please go ahead.
So the motion is to communicate to VHCB that the city council would not approve the use of open space funds unless there was a permanent conservation easement attached to the 6 acres.
Yep.
Right.
Mentioned in 1C.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, can I clarify, or maybe just add a comment. I don't know that we can't get the same goal of the approximately 30 acres and potentially have this option on the other 6. I'm kind of going back to the process as it was, as I understood it initially, was a lot more flushed, or it was presented as a lot more flushed out than it has become over the several months. So from my standpoint, I feel like it's our obligation to allow VHCB to go through their process. They've developed some language here. It may have to be negotiated later in terms of moving forward, but I feel like they got to this point through their own process. They should take this to their board and next week, and then we may be having a different conversation later. But to try to negotiate tonight to get the potential for some clarifying information that we don't really know what the thought is. I'm hearing people interpret what they think they meant, and I think part of the process is allowing any of the parties to clarify what the intent was of what they were trying to accomplish.
But we're just clarifying our intent and making sure that they know that as they go through their process. That's all this is doing.
And I say we had a process we went through for a letter of interest, and that should stand on its own.
But this
at
is a new
point.
process based on this new piece of information.
Yeah.
We're just trying to clarify in our letter, a portion of our letter of support to counter 1C so they understand. That's all.
Yeah, it's countering their language.
Not a negotiation. It's just like you've developed this 1C thing, and we just want you to know that
it doesn't fly.
That 3 councilors don't see a way to how that works. So because it didn't exist before.
Yeah.
All right. Ready for the vote?
Yep.
Ready.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
So Elizabeth and Mike vote nay, and the other 3 vote yay. All right. Thank you. So that's enough direction. And also, do we want to not have a executive session on this item 13? Can we?
Do you want a helpline, Paul?
Pardon me?
And do you want a helpline during your session?
Again, 10 minutes on the agenda for this.
Could I ask that it be clarified if this is presented, Paul, that there was a 3-2 vote on this recommended change?
I'm happy to say that 3-2. I will say that is the council. I can also say that it was a 3-2 vote of the council.
And it was a 3-2 vote on the letter of support as well. You can also state.
No, it was 4-1 on the letter of support.
Oh, good. That's even better.
So, yes.
Thank you.
That's right. You voted for it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tentatively.
That's right. Tentatively, yeah.
With caution. Yes.
That level of nuance I can't cover, though.
I don't feel a need for executive session at this point.
No? Okay. We're going to strike. What?
Yes.
There's a second one, but
For
item
the long
13
view.
is just on long view. So we're going to strike 13. We're done with 10. We're going to go to item 11, which is review the significant agenda topics for the council's regular meeting on December 16th, which would be the FY26 Budget City Council discussion and set a public hearing. Then receive an overview and budget request from the South Burlington City Center Collaborative, the SB3C. Receive, consider approving an FY25 work plan from the Rec and Parks Committee. Receive a presentation from GMT on a potential special assessment request.
And that's tentative for right now.
And that's tentative.
Yeah.
Okay. And also then convene as the Board of Health to appoint Pam Wayman to be Health Officer and Peter Walsh as the Deputy Health Officer. So, anybody have issues with that future agenda list? Anything you want to say about that? Okay. Moving on to item 12, which is other business. I have a quick item to announce, which is that if you have noticed that there are bird bikes all over the city, right? South Burlington and Burlington, right? The whole area. So I went to CATMA and I emailed Emily and I said, Emily, I forgot her last name. I go, what's going to happen with those bikes? And she turned around and you know, day being Monday after the holiday, said, we are picking them up, or somebody is picking them up right now. So just so everybody knows, the bird bikes are going to be disappearing. If you find a bird bike somewhere and it hasn't been picked up in the next couple of weeks, just let me know, and I'll let Emily know, because she said that was okay to do. Because it's possible batteries may have dried up, you know, for the cell transponder. Oh, Mr.
Just clarification,
Yeah.
disappearing for the winter.
For the winter, yes, yeah,
Not
the season's
permanent.
over. The season's over, right. But there were like 4 stuck on Dorset Street next to one of the buildings, just crashed, you know.
They're
The
just
best,
flying south. They're coming back.
when I went to the Guard back in June, somebody was riding one and got off at the entrance to the first entrance is just closed, right? Just got off and just started walking because the thing locked up because I guess the battery died, and just left it on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, well, that's useful, you know. But anyway, they serve a purpose, I guess. All right, so then we're moving on to item 14, which is consider entering into executive session for the purposes of discussing confidential attorney-client communications related to pending civil litigation to which the public body is a party for 1 VSA 313A1E and F, and specifically the Bourne property. Do we have a motion for that?
Though it sounds like we're going into something super secret, the Bourne property. Okay, I move that the council make a specific finding that premature general public knowledge of the council's discussion of pending or probable civil litigation to which the city may be a party and confidential attorney-client communication made for the purpose of providing professional legal service to the council would clearly place this public body at a substantial disadvantage.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. 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 It passes unanimously.
Okay, I now move that the city council enter into executive session under 1 VSA 313A1E and F for the purpose of discussing pending or probable civil litigation to which the city may be a party and confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal service to the council, inviting Jesse Baker, Steve Law, Colin McNeil, Paul Connor into the session with council for the discussion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. So we're now in executive session, and we will not be coming back after adjournment. So we're going to.
So let's just wait a quick minute while